Go ahead and introduce yourself. I assume most of them already know who I am.
I'm guessing they do, and even I do. I am a candidate for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination. Would you
Yeah.
like me to go on?
Oh, sure, as much as you want to. Yeah, I'm familiar
Well, I
with your
appreciate that.
credentials. You've got some stuff to list.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I think my bio will probably be the worst 2 minutes of your audience's day today, but we'll get through it in a condensed fashion. I am a professional economist. I was so at least for a couple of decades until I became a police officer in my second career for the 11 and a half years until about a year and a half ago in South Broward County, Florida. As an economist, I taught economics at three different universities. I worked for the federal government at a couple agencies, worked for the White House for a couple of years, had my own business for a bunch of years with a buddy. We provided consulting services to financial institutions, and we were in the business of educating bankers and other financial services professionals. I worked in Washington for quite a few years as an advocate on behalf of the industry for free markets, lowering regulation in order to promote competition, that sort of thing. I grew up as a banker and a conservative economist before going to graduate school. Worked for a couple of banks in and around New York City before moving to Washington, D.C. And I'm very happy to be with you.
Oh, well, happy to have you here as well. Thank you. So, yeah, Mike, I gotta say, I'm surprised that your manager reached out because typically socialists are not known for being very sympathetic towards libertarian economic policy. I mean, I call myself a libertarian socialist because I think that
Yeah.
libertarianism fundamentally is a socialist ideology. But what motivated your interest to speak?
To be with you tonight, you mean?
Yeah.
Because, I think because of just what you said, you consider yourself a libertarian, which means I believe that probably several folks in your audience consider themselves libertarians. And I'm interested in getting my message out to libertarians because I'm interested, among other things, in their feedback. I'm running a campaign that is very policy forward. I'm running a campaign that I believe contains quite a few very, very transformational ideas. I back that up with the credibility that comes with a couple of careers in public service and public policy. I back it up with a very professional team in terms of our campaign itself. And so I believe that we do have this style of campaign that will put us in a good shape on the other half of business, on the other side of the nomination. And I believe that it's important. I think the Libertarian Party has a huge opportunity to play a major role in the American political landscape. I think we've had that opportunity in the past, and we have sort of missed it. I think we played it wrong a little bit. So I'm trying to move the party in the direction in which I believe it needs to go strategically, and that's to run the kind of campaign that we're running.
Yeah, I actually went to a libertarian political conference. It was in oh my God, it was in Tennessee, the city of musicians. How am I blanking on it right now? So not
Uh-huh.
Jacksonville. It was
Was it the Libertarian Party of Tennessee, or was it a different group?
well, I think that there were a number of people. Nashville was in Nashville. There were a number of people there. I remember there was this weird ideological schism because there were a lot of people who were, I guess I would call them sort of principled American libertarians, where they sincerely believe in like the overreach of government, that kind of stuff. And then there were
Sure.
these, I guess they were mostly associated with the Mises Institute, but I would consider them primarily fascists. Whose main goal in being there was to kind of groom the people present into moving over from American libertarianism over into a kind of like radical, like far right control by other means thing. And if you were talking about like missteps within the Libertarian Party, it does seem like there's a lot of turmoil in there at the moment.
There's a little bit of turmoil. There was a changeover in leadership last year, and change always creates a little bit of angst. I think most of what we would call turmoil has died down substantially. There were a few folks with some hurt feelings, of course, on both sides of the arguments that were necessary to take place. But I think the party is in a lot better shape than it was a year ago in that regard. I do believe also that the turnover in leadership, we will look back on it and say it was a necessary thing and largely a good thing. The Without knowing exactly who the individuals were that you were referring to or what the conversation was, there is a group inside the Libertarian Party, the Mises Caucus, of which I'm a member, that grew up out of a disappointment with the way national campaigns had been handled previously, the presidential campaigns. And that was a disappointment that the campaigns did not represent a very principled stance, that it was not sufficiently policy forward, as I say, um, arguably not sufficiently bold and edgy. The reason I think it's important is because I believe, strategically as well as ethically, it's important that the Libertarian Party represent itself in a way that completely differentiates us from the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And I think that that's a lot of where the energy came from that went into the creation and rapid growth of the Mises Caucus inside the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of variance within that caucus as to how they want the party to be run. It's really just a difference in the attitudes I see. I've talked to people who have run in the Libertarian Party before, and I think usually, I mean, obviously, sincere disagreements were had on economic issues, but I think a lot of people have their hearts and minds in the right place, at least in the basic, in the first principles. And then there are some people who pursue this as a kind of mode of deregulatory fascism, where it's like you see this a lot, for example, with the Civil Rights Act, right? Where, you know, people will say, okay, so if you say, let's get rid of the Civil Rights Act, well, that's politically unpopular, right? We all know Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we know how this came about. But if you say instead, well, let's let the states handle it. Let the federal government get their hands off of these issues and let people vote in them, you know, independently. What they're saying when they, you know, say that is, well, let's get the southern states to revoke the Civil Rights Act. You know, it'll pass in California and New York, but in a lot of places it won't. And that's, you know, piecemeal, a way of getting the right agenda forward. Right for them at least. So when I talk with libertarians, I'm never quite sure what exactly I'm talking with or about, because I don't know whether or not they seek deregulation as a way of promoting freedom or as a means of getting rid of like civil liberties protections, that kind of stuff.
I don't know any This is not to say that they don't exist. I'm not arguing with you. I don't know any libertarians about whom I believe they're interested in getting rid of civil liberties. Uh, if you've met them and you've had that conversation, then you're a step ahead of me. But certainly, I don't know anyone that I've worked with in and around the party, in and around either that caucus or the other caucuses. I do believe that it is extremely important that the federal government get out of doing as much as it does. Uh, yeah, civil rights legislation is maybe an example. I don't think it's anywhere near the most important example. There's plenty of regulatory affairs that could just as well be handled at the state level as at any other level, and for that reason, more appropriately handled at the state level.
Oh,
So
that's what I call it. Yeah, that's the sentiment I'm talking about. Like Ron Paul said, I think he said that it was a massive violation, the Civil Rights Act. It was a massive violation of the rights of private property and contract, which are the bedrocks of free society. And of course, I mean, the consequence of this, right, this deregulatory stance is always going to be, you know, these regulations exist for a reason. If you get rid of them on a federal level, not all states will enforce them independently. And as a consequence of that, some people in this country will be less free.
Or would differently, yeah.
Well, what changes would one make to the Civil Rights Act with regards to, say, prohibiting businesses from denying service to people based on their race? Like, what variance would we be looking for state by state, as opposed to just, like, blanket freedoms that we provide everyone through federal power?
I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, you chose your words carefully to create the divisiveness you want. Good for you. Freedom is not usually a word we associate with requiring people to do certain things or precluding people from doing certain things. So I think it's an odd choice of words.
Well, it certainly is freedom.
You're asking me to predict the way that states would go? I don't know. My prediction would be that the vast majority of states, and possibly all of them, would adopt regulatory positions just like the legislation that exists today at the federal level. That would be my prediction. It's not necessarily, something that I think is a perfect solution or a horrible solution. I'm not suggesting that, but if you're asking me to predict it, that's what my prediction would be.
What functionally is the difference between the federal government protecting those civil liberties and a state government doing it? Like California's got like 45 million people in it, you know. It is larger than a lot of independent nations. It seems in either case, you're just relying on a legal infrastructure to provide civil liberties to you. Just in one case, we ensure them for all Americans, and in another case, we're kind of piecemealing it federally between the states.
Well, you can call it piecemeal, but that is the appropriate vehicle. That is the way the American government is set up, and for good cause. Communities do have a right to set up the types of regulatory structures that they want. And the federal government doesn't have the authority, either legally, constitutionally speaking, or in terms of ethics, to make these decisions for states.
Does it not have the legal authority? I'm pretty sure the federal government has the right to designate laws of this kind.
No, I would flatly disagree with you. I don't think you'd be able to point to the Constitution and identify that.
That the federal government supersedes in authority the state government?
Uh, no, you wouldn't be able to point to the Constitution and identify, uh, language there that suggests that they have the right to regulate relationships among people or speech among individuals. I don't think you'd be able to point to state constitutions to say that either, just by the way. But certainly anything about which the Constitution is silent is explicitly left to the states in the 10th Amendment. You're making me say things that you already know. Like, I don't think you're pretending not to know this.
Well, I mean, obviously we're talking about like a separate cartoon universe, because functionally in the real world, the federal government has the authority to do all of these things, and does, and has been doing so for centuries. I mean, we could argue like
yes, the civil rights legislation does exist. No one's arguing otherwise. It is a real thing. It is on the books. Yes.
Right. So, as things exist now, if you argue then that this right doesn't explicitly go to the states either, because the state constitution doesn't give them that power either, it seems like the logic that you're suggesting, or the consequence of that logic, would be that you couldn't do any kind of legislation at a federal, state, or even like local level with regards to, say, civil rights protections, because there is no constitution that explicitly says, right, like this institution has the right to regulate this specific behavior. You're not going to find anything that conditional.
I think that there are a tremendous number of legislative examples that the states do have the authority to regulate everything that has anything to do with a relationship to the state, right? States should absolutely be precluding themselves and all kinds of smaller governmental entities within the state from behaving in certain ways when it comes to protecting individual liberties. Absolutely. I don't think that anyone should have an argument about that. When it comes to a governmental agency deciding that it's going to make rules about how you engage in relationships with employees, I think we should all be a little bit concerned about that.
I am. I'm concerned we don't have enough regulations in that specific field, to be
You
honest
think that
with
we
you.
should have more regulations about how companies are allowed to I mean, where do we give me an example? Because maybe I would agree with you. I just can't think of anything. Give me an example where the combination of federal, local, and state governments don't regulate the relationship today between an employer and an employee.
Abuse of
I think the
contract labor.
entire waterfront is covered at this point, isn't it?
Abuse of contract labor. Corporations tend to have people on as contractors rather than employees, so they don't have to provide specific benefits.
But these are regulated now. Those are regulated.
But there's still abuse of contract labor. We need to regulate it.
Well, there's all kinds of abuse. I mean, you and I could be mean to each other. I don't plan on it. I don't think you plan on it either. I mean, we can, be mean to each other, but
But
that's
I'm not
not to say
talking
that
about
there
being
isn't a
mean.
regulatory apparatus in place. There is. The governments today regulate that quite heavily, and it's been adjudicated in state and federal court.
The contractual relationships between employers and employees isn't just people being mean to each other. We're talking about structural laws that affect millions and millions of people. They have talked about these issues, to be sure. Contract labor has come up in every court in the land. It's been brought up in law, but it remains an issue that is severely unregulated, in my opinion. I want more ecological
I guess you and I are going to
regulations.
have to agree to disagree. It's a heavily regulated area. It's heavily adjudicated. There are books, volumes, you know this already, volumes of texts on standing case law in these areas. I don't think the problem is an absence or a lack of
But
regulation.
I want
Now, you
more.
might feel that the regulation should be different. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I would disagree with that. I mean, I would agree that it should be different too. You and I might want to go in different directions with the changes we would make. I believe that the government spends far too much energy regulating our relationships with each other and needs to get the hell out.
Well, that's my concern. I actually strongly disagree. There may be case law which talks about these issues, but that doesn't mean that the conclusions they settled on are the ones that I agree with. I think the state
Agreed. Me
has a
too. Me too.
responsibility.
Agreed.
Yeah, well, I think the state has a responsibility to the best of its ability. There are no perfect systems, but to protect people from corporations. I think that corporations have an incredibly autocratic role in the
Do you think
lives
that we
most
ought to
people
have
live.
regulations protecting corporations from each other or corporations from unions?
Um, In some instances, sure, a legal framework should dictate essentially all relations between legal bodies. Yeah. I don't know what exactly they need
The
protection
government should
from
regulate
unions,
all
but
relations among legal bodies.
yeah, like corporations, unions, you have to
I'm sorry,
file
that's a
these with the
fairly
government.
chilling statement.
Well, I don't think so. We have laws, and these laws already exist. You have to file for a union, right? Like these organizations, you have to write
No, no,
them.
I'm not arguing that they shouldn't have a right to exist. I'm just saying that the idea that the government ought to be regulating all relationships among legal entities, like between you and me, between corporations, between us and corporations, between corporations and unions. I think that that is a frightening,
It's,
breathtaking statement, to
it's
be
already
honest.
true. I can't
I didn't
throw
know
a
you were
rock at
going to
you.
go there. That takes my breath away.
Well,
That actually makes the hair stand up on the back of my
Well, that's
neck.
the thing. What I said may take your breath away, but legal frameworks are what keeps me from physically taking your breath away. You know, if I were to meet you in the street and we were to get into a fight, like legal
I think there's
frameworks
a big
dictate.
difference between a criminal code and regulating the relationship between two individuals in terms of an employer-employee
Well, wait, no,
relationship.
what? Fundamentally, this is just a legal framework that we use to guide people's behavior towards mutually beneficial outcomes. We have these guiding
Do you
behaviors,
feel
these
like it's the
systems.
government's role to guide our relationships?
If it would keep people from murdering each other in the street, then certainly, yeah, that is guiding people's behavior. That is the state using its power, its autonomy, its monopolization
Right.
over
Is that how you
violence.
feel about employer-employee relationships, that we're guiding people to avoid murder?
No, I think that we're not doing nearly enough to guide people away from murder, to be honest with you. I think that at the
Well,
current relationship
look, you
those
and
two
I
institutions
agree that
have are
we should
pretty
be
violent.
guiding people away from murder. I spent 11 and a half years of my life trying to protect people's
Yeah, you were a
individual
cop. You
freedoms
were
and
an
rights from
enforcer of
bad
the
people.
state's role in guiding people's behavior with each other. It's just a matter of which laws we do or don't agree with.
Yes, that's right. I don't think that beyond physical harm, right, or taking someone's property, beyond that, I don't think that the government has, ethically speaking, an appropriate role in guiding our relationships.
Oh,
I
I
mean, do you think
strongly
that the
disagree.
government ought to have some role in guiding the relationship between you and me, or between you and other people, or between me and other people?
Yeah, I can't physically attack you. I can't harass you. There are laws for libel and defamation that, depending on what I do, you could sue me for. You would be
Right. But
calling in.
outside of bringing harm to someone, do you think that we need the government to go beyond that?
Well, libel and defamation wouldn't bring you physical harm. It would bring
No,
harm
no,
to
not
your.
physical harm. I get that. I
Mm,
mean, I don't want someone to have the right to defraud me, take my money. I get that. But outside of taking someone's stuff or bringing harm, I believe in torts. I think that, civil liability courts are a very useful mechanism. I just don't see how the government ought to, beyond that, the government has an appropriate role. I mean, I'm really curious. This is not merely a rhetorical question. I'm really curious in how you feel about this. You really believe that the government has a role in regulating the relationships among people beyond just, protecting them from, harm.
well, no, I think the
I'm
point is to
curious.
protect them from
Why
harm.
why would that be? I guess why would you figure the government was an appropriate arbiter of how we treat each other?
Well, the point is to protect people from harm. You know, it's like a social contract kind of thing. The idea being that you want to create roles that lead to the largest amount of good for the greatest number of people. And we can do this in obvious ways, like preventing people from murdering each other or stealing from each other. And there are laws for that.
I don't think we
But
should
we can
keep
do it.
going back to the murder example.
Well,
That's
well,
something in
but
which we agree.
I wasn't finished. I'm glad we agree on that at least. But there are plenty of other things that are very harmful to people that have been kind of legally institutionalized. Historically, it goes like a lack of a minimum wage, a lack of guidelines for workplace safety,
Well, the
slavery.
minimum wage is a curious example. Why would you feel that the government were smarter at deciding what you should be allowed to do regarding going to work for someone than the employee himself or the employer herself?
This is
You know,
this is a
it's a curious example
well,
because the
it's a
economic literature
facile
is
and
rife
naive.
with demonstrations of what a bad idea it is economically.
It's
But
so well. Hold
never
on.
mind all that. Ethically speaking,
You
why
have
would the
a well. Hold
government
on,
be
sir.
appropriate?
You have a degree in economics, and I'm sure that you're more studied on this, so you should know that there is literally no evidence to suggest that a minimum wage hurts the availability of jobs in regions where it's applied. I'm not talking about people's intelligence here. Everyone is acting in accordance with their mutual interest. So corporations want to make the highest amount of money possible. Workers want to make the highest wage possible. And this would be a fair relationship if both groups had equal power. But that's not even remotely true. Monopoly and monopsony power, inelastic markets, the fact that people don't often have the training or the ability to move out of their area. We know for a fact, because we have millennia of historical evidence to support this case, that if corporations want to set up a system where they pay you jack and you just have to live with it, that's life. It is only through a greater power,
I'm
a
sorry, where is
democratic
there an
state,
example of that?
literally all of human history from feudalism downward and through
Okay,
the first
that
several
strikes
centuries
me
of
as
capitalism.
similar to going to the argument about murder. I mean, why don't we focus on this century in this country? I
This
mean, is there
century, you mean
really
the
a place where
21st?
you think that people
The
feel
21st
so
century? Well, no,
trapped
no,
that
no.
they need the
So
government?
we can ignore
Go
like
ahead.
historical precedent if you want, and I would just defer to undocumented immigrants. People who are not protected by the state because they're not citizens immediately get exploited by corporations here because it turns out when you don't have the legal protections afforded to you by U.S. citizenship, and the first time you interact with a cop will be your last time in the U.S., that means it's actually really easy to exploit you. That's happening right now to millions of people in this country because they can't rely on the state to protect them the way it protects you and I. They are not given the same fair consideration from corporations. They're treated worse.
Well, the exploitation of immigrants is a little bit deeper problem than that. The black market's created by the government precluding people from coming in legally and therefore incentivizing them to come in through human trafficking is a much richer problem than just, people coming in and getting low wage work.
I agree. I'm
Uh,
pro open borders, but you have to acknowledge that without the protection of the government, those undocumented laborers are immediately exploited. We could get a comparable effect simply by removing
it's
government
not
laws
because that
regarding
they don't have
workers.
a minimum wage in place.
But they're not getting paid minimum wage in a lot of cases. So that often is actually the issue.
The market won't drive their supply of labor to a price that exceeds what you believe that the state minimum wage ought to be, or in some places already is. That is
They're paid
not
less than minimum
because
wage. There are
what's that?
there are undocumented immigrants and U.S. citizens working side by side on farms in the Southwest, and the U.S. citizens are
And
getting
getting
paid
paid
more
less than the minimum wage. Now, what would happen if you instituted a minimum wage and made it stick in those places?
in a way that protects the undocumented workers. Well, then they would get paid
In a
minimum
ways
wage.
that you call it protection, but it's not protection. Assuming those markets are clearing, and there's no reason to believe that those markets don't clear like any other market, what you're going to end up with is fewer people being hired. That's
Well,
not protecting
there's
them.
just no evidence to suggest that. Also, the number of workers we have working
That's
those
how markets work.
well, it's how you think
There's
markets
no
work.
reason to believe that they
It's
don't.
not how markets work. We need the number of workers we have because that's how we produce our food. The idea that if we had to pay undocumented workers minimum wage, that we would just suddenly cut like to a third our agricultural production because
You
instead we
made
just
up
wouldn't
those
pay the tens
numbers.
of
You're
millions.
going back to the murder example. Yes.
I'm not
I
going to the
don't think
murder
it's
example.
really fair to
There is
say, well,
no
we need
evidence.
government regulation, otherwise
So,
we would
so
murder each
listen,
other.
you have not answered the question that I have posed to you, the hypothetical here. You
All right, which
say
is it?
the government does not protect us from corporations, that it's not necessary to manage or regulate these wage interactions. But we have a group of people who are not protected by US law, not functionally at least, undocumented immigrants, and as a consequence, they're horribly exploited for their labor. That would be you, and that would be me, if we lived in a state that didn't afford us any worker protections. We would be just as hungry and desperate
Well,
as
I
the
can't speak
millions of
to your
Americans who
resume if you
lived at
feel
the
like
turn
you
of the
wouldn't
century.
get the. I can't speak to your resume. You graduated from Humboldt, and you seem like a very educated guy with good skills.
Thank you.
I'm fairly confident that you would be able to get a job paying over minimum wage if the government failed to protect you in some sense. I think that that's a silly thing there.
Could
The
I
reason,
enjoy
so
that wage knowing millions of my countrymen were living in row houses, starving, because they didn't happen to be born into an affluent family like I was? I would be the same person then,
do you
arguing
really
for
think
those
that's how
protections.
labor markets work?
Well, historically, yes, most people have been poor, so that is an empirical fact with regards to the labor markets.
Yeah, I think that it might be time for you to touch some grass. You got to get out and see how labor markets work and how people actually live. You don't have to be
What
an economist to do it. You don't have to be a cop to do it, but either one of those will teach you how communities work, how labor markets work, how they
do you
clear,
disagree with
and
the
what happens
assertion?
when you can interrupt me if you want. Your turn.
Do you disagree with the assertion that around the turn of the
Yes.
century, like 1900 or so, that most Americans were poor?
Most Americans were poor. The reason that they were lifted out of poverty is because markets were allowed to work. The reason that wages were so low at the turn of the. I'm sorry, you find that funny?
I do, but I was going to let you finish before
That's
I
the
responded.
historical record. I don't think that's a very contentious statement. That's just how economies
Markets
have
were
developed. And
fully
by the way, not just the
functioning
United States.
in the
The reason
1900s, I
wages were
promise you.
so low at the turn of the century is because there was such a great deal of labor available in the agrarian economy that was migrating slowly to the urban economy. There was so much labor available that there was no way to drive up wages except in the very, very long run.
And yet the robber
There's
barons who controlled the factories those millions of poor people happened to work at for 12 or 14 hours a day were
It
very
was
wealthy.
because they were providing the jobs that
So
drew. Look, I'm
this
not
is
arguing with you
so
about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but you
I
can't
am
just sit there
arguing
and
the ethics.
mischaracterize the
Well,
way
no, no,
labor
no.
markets
I haven't
developed in the United
mischaracterized
States.
anything. That is what a market does when there are no protections for workers. The biggest, meanest, fattest bastard who already owns the factories gets all the money and everyone else gets jack. This is the economics of cuckoldry. You and I may have the fortune now of being in relatively good positions, but the vast majority of people in this country, even today in this country, the wealthiest country on earth, still live lives of poverty and desperation. Most of them can't even afford a small
It's
emergency.
just, I'm sorry, that's empirically a very, very silly
It's
statement. You can't
empirically
be
a
a
correct
serious
statement. I
person and
agree
say
that it's
that.
silly in the sense that our economic system is silly, but
The
we have not
vast majority of
fundamentally
Americans live by the standards of the rest of the world.
paycheck to paycheck. And I don't care about the standards of the rest of the world. I'm talking empirically,
Okay, by the
paycheck to
standards of
paycheck.
historic American livelihoods, the
Compared to
vast
what,
majority
100
of
years ago?
Americans now live very well
Yeah, compared to worse things. Of course, this is tautological. Things are
compared to
better
the
now
past,
than they.
compared to people.
Yeah,
What do you want to compare it to?
so I want to talk about what it actually is, because this is the problem. This is like a neoliberal market economics, right? Well, things are better than they were before. I don't care. What, so things were better in 1890 than they were during the slave period. That doesn't mean you stop there. You always try to improve. Right now,
That's
most
right. And we've
Americans
made
live
steady
paycheck to paycheck.
improvement in labor markets and every other
Yeah, through
market
regulation, we have
every
protected
decade.
workers. Workers enjoy the highest proportional amount of wealth in this country back at the height of union participation in the 1950s. That was post FDR's New Deal. That was after Social Security came about. That was after the government subsidized the hell out of
Now,
new
you
housing.
know as well as I do, if you've spent any time with the data at all, and I suspect that you have, so try not to hide behind a sophomoric understanding of how the data work, that the way that we measure the contribution of income to labor is very different than it used to be, because now we have a larger, much hugely larger proportion that we call entrepreneurialism that gets categorized as earnings to capital, where they are really truly earnings to labor in a lot of ways. So, it's because of the nomenclature that we've come up with this idea that less money is paid to labor these days than ever before. But
It
fundamentally
is a
speaking,
fact of the world that most Americans cannot afford a small emergency or that they live paycheck to paycheck. This is unacceptable. That it is better than the past means nothing to me. We managed to maintain a low unemployment rate for U.S. citizens, but for some reason, in spite of the fact that the total pool of labor must not be so oversaturated that we can maintain a low unemployment rate, undocumented immigrants are getting paid significantly less than minimum wage and are being afforded no worker protections. So clearly, the forces that are acting on the undocumented immigrants are not just some exceptional factor of additional labor supply in those areas, because we have a relatively even spread of population across this country. We've got states like Wyoming and Montana. We've got states like New York and California, where people all get paid the minimum wage or higher. And yet, the one group that doesn't get workers' protections, the one group where the state can't intervene because the state doesn't even know they're here, they and they alone get paid drastically less. That is the market. It is a market of poverty, and you are wishing it on every American.
that is one of the most sophomoric statements of labor markets I have ever heard. The reason wages are so low for undocumented workers is because the labor market produces so many potential undocumented workers and other workers of low skills in those particular areas. And therefore, well, that's enough to keep wages low. And therefore, the industries that take advantage of low wage employment, the only industries that can take advantage of low wage employment, are therefore located in areas where they can avail themselves of this wage pool. It's exactly the same thing that happened 100 years ago after the recent advent of the technological revolution, after the industrial revolution. This is why wages were so low for so long, because it took a long time to bring labor out of the agrarian sector. That's just the way it happened. I'm not arguing it was a good thing or a bad thing, but that's how labor markets work. But the idea that you want to say that the reason the American economy has evolved over the past 100 years in a way that's brought up standards of living and wages, that is somehow the result of government regulation,
Mm-hmm.
is, I'm sorry, those dots don't connect. I don't
It
think
is.
any economist would even say that there's a logical progression in thinking there. The reason wages come up is because of the ratio. You know this, but you're going to make me say it for you anyway.
I like hearing it
Wages are
from your
driven
voice.
by the ratio of capital to labor. The
And
reason wages have come up in the United States is because we have been so fortunate in accumulating a giant pool of capital and technological innovation, uh, greater research, obviously, has pushed these things. This is why the wage rates have come up. And of course, it's the reason why we've had such a, by historical
and
standards,
yet,
crazy low
all over
unemployment
this
rate.
country, hundreds of millions of workers, all licensed with the government and protected as a U.S. citizen, manage to make the minimum wage or more where they live, and the one group of people who are spared that protection get far less. And this is during a
The,
time
the
of a
reason people in the North make
wait, no,
so
no, no,
much
wait.
more than the minimum
There
wage
is
is
a
because not because there's a
labor
minimum wage law.
Yes, that is a government protection. There is a labor shortage in agriculture right now. You say the reason why these undocumented immigrants are subject to lower wages is because of an overabundance of labor in that field. Interestingly, this doesn't seem to affect the wages of legal citizens who are working in that field, but, that could be a coincidence. In spite of this, there is a labor shortage. So they should be getting paid more. They should be
There's a
getting
labor
paid more
shortage all over the United States,
insert.
but
Yeah,
not where people come across the border.
in agriculture. There is a labor shortage in
Have you been
agriculture.
down to the border?
Have you do you typically get your economic data by going down to countries' borders and asking around?
That's an interesting answer to my question.
Yes, I have
No,
actually.
but
San
I
Diego's right
do
against the
pick
border.
up
I've been down there multiple
anecdotally on
times.
how the markets work in certain areas. I spent a couple of days at the border last fall, and it was interesting to learn not just about the black markets that undermine individual rights so much in terms of bringing people in as indentured servants. It's horrible, as you know. It's one area where I'm sure you and I agree that the way the government has handled the situation has been bad for immigrants, full stop. We need a much more pro-immigrant and much more pro-immigration policy. But yes, the pool of labor is driving down wages in
Okay,
those areas.
so let me repeat this because I don't know if you heard it properly the first time. There is a labor shortage in agriculture. By your like economics 101, like living in a smooth, frictionless surface with no gravity like scenario for economics, they should be paying higher wages, higher than minimum, certainly, to undocumented workers, especially because undocumented workers aren't subject to the kinds of protections that we are with, say, like OSHA or like overtime. So you would think there would actually be a massive economic incentive to hire them. And yet, as we've seen throughout all of history, regardless of whether or not there was an oversaturation of labor in these areas, in the absence of legal protections, employers will treat people as badly as they are capable. They will enslave you if they can, and if they can't enslave you, they will sharecrop you. And if they can't sharecrop you, they will pay you the lowest amount that you can legally be paid. And this has been the trend through American history up to this point, where people in every state are paid the lowest amount corporations can get away with, and they will pay you less without these regulations. See, this is what I mean about freedom. You talk a big game about freedom, but the only freedom you care about is the freedom for pigs to munch more money off the workers doing the actual work. Out there on those farms...
You're now lecturing me on what it is I care about?
Yes, I am. I think you are concerned primarily... And this is why you were a libertarian and a cop, because the freedom you care about is the freedom cops protect, that of the bourgeoisie. You care about the systems and rules that protect property.
I'm sorry, the city I worked for didn't have a lot of that. Can you spell it for me?
The institution of the police is one which predominantly protects property rights. You care about property rights. Property is something that I do not have in equal measure to, say, Jeff Bezos. What I have in equal measure to him is a life. All of us have lives in equal measure. Laws should protect life. But when you care primarily about protecting property, all of a sudden your considerations are skewed heavily towards those who have more of it. And that's what I'm hearing right now. That's why I'm hearing you pretend to care about the conditions of the undocumented worker. And to be fair, you do support open borders, and I certainly agree with you on that. But in the meantime, we must recognize undocumented immigrants are only experiencing what all of us would be experiencing were it not for the government protecting us.
There's so much in there that you said that was just factually incorrect. I don't know where to start. Let's start with this. I did work as a police officer. No, I was not as consumed as you seem to be about property. My job was to protect people's rights. Yes, in large part, it was from crime. Yes, there's an element of it too that means we have to protect people from government in the sense that police officers have a tremendous amount of latitude in how they carry out their appointed missions. And so police officers need to be very careful to protect people from the government itself. But largely, we're talking about protecting people from crime. And of course, a huge part of the job is responding to all kinds of calls for service and emergencies that have nothing to do with crime. I assure you, the literally dozens of times that I performed CPR on people had nothing to do with crime, except for, of course, the government's creation of black markets and creating a prohibition on drugs that leads to all kinds of problems with addiction and fraud that preclude people from seeking the help that they need to beat addiction problems. No, much of what I did was supporting people's right to be protected from crime that has nothing to do with property. It's protecting people from violence. No, I don't know who gave you the impression that I or anybody else who's a libertarian is somehow consumed with this idea of property being what matters. So I hope that we can dispense with that. I'm not going to say anything that insults you or your motivations or anything, and I think that I deserve the same respect.
Are you telling me that as a libertarian, you are not concerned with the protection of property as a fundamental legal value?
You seem to believe that libertarians are consumed with property as opposed to people's protection from crime and violence. You seem to want to characterize police officers as being consumed with this idea of protecting rich people's property. I don't know where you got that. You obviously didn't get that from working as a police officer. Maybe you know police officers who have that attitude. I'm sorry for them or for you and being led astray in that sense. But no, that was not my job, and that was not my attitude, and that was not what my employer asked me to do.
Well, if we're not primarily concerned with the protection of property, then maybe we should talk about the greatest road to freedom, which is, of course, wealth redistribution. Much as in the case when the land and the property
You're characterizing taking money from
owners,
someone and giving it to someone else as promoting, what was the word you used? Freedom?
Yes.
I don't think freedom is an appropriate word to use when it comes to taking money from someone and giving it to someone else. By whose authority would you do such a thing? Because you thought it was a good idea, or because you voted on it?
That's where all the authority for my ideas comes from. Yeah, if I think it's a good idea, if I think it's ethical, then I'll argue for it. The institution that actually carries it out just has to be the one capable of getting the
Well, that's the
job
difference
done.
between you and a libertarian, is that I might think something is a good idea, but I'm not shoving it down anyone else's throat.
Oh, well, see, I think that traditionally, if a person is, subscribed to an ethical position, it's usually good to bring about the conditions which allow that condition to flourish. I mean, we want good things, right?
Those are two different things. You are a slippery rascal, aren't you?
If you think, for example, that slavery is wrong,
creating the conditions for something to flourish is very different from shoving it down their throat.
Okay, well,
you seem to think that it's a good idea to take money from someone and give it to someone else.
How about shoving abolitionism down somebody's throat, right? The Civil War, North versus South, Those Southerners, they were getting awfully uppity down there with their slavery and with their Fort Sumter attacks. I say, if you think ethically that slavery is wrong, which I do and you do as well, I think it's okay to shove that down their throats. I mean, Vernon Sherman went and marched his way on down south, and I tell you, we took a lot of money and property from those folks.
I think we can all agree that it was, in some sense, our Constitution's, our nation's original sin not to ban slavery from the get-go. I don't think you're going to get too much pushback from me or anybody else in the United States about that.
Oh, sure. I would hope I wouldn't, at least.
Exactly.
So, but in that case, I mean, we did indeed shove abolitionism down their throats, right? We killed a lot of Confederates to prove that point.
Yeah, I don't think that bringing up slavery is a particularly useful example in bolstering your case that we ought to be taking money from rich people at force of government coercion,
but we
and giving it to someone else because you think it's a good idea. I don't think those two things have much in common.
Well, to them,
do you really think that slavery is similar to the argument against slavery is similar to the argument in favor of taking money from people and giving it to someone else?
We call workers wage slaves for a reason. But yeah, the Confederates thought slaves were property. To them, the Union was taking their property. That was the issue. Do I think they're property? No. But I think you and I have different definitions.
So you would agree with me that the two arguments actually have nothing to do with each other.
Okay. But you agree then that it's morally justifiable to shove abolitionism down the throat of the Confederates, right? That's a fine thing.
It is ethically justifiable for a community, whether a community small, state, or federal. It is legally justifiable, morally, ethically justifiable for a community of people to get together and decide what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, about protecting people's individual rights. Absolutely. Well, so do I think that ought to be something that's constitutionally protected by the federal government? Yes, absolutely. I think we're all disappointed that the Constitution didn't ban slavery.
Well, it depends on the rights we're talking about, certainly. So the right to not be a slave, what about indentured servitude? What about people selling decades of their life for travel over to the United States? Because that was one of the big ways that the Irish came over, for example. They wanted to come over here where there were jobs and less famine, so they would say, okay, take me over there in a ship.
Some
if I survive 6 years
to you. I get where you're going. Some gray form of slavery. No, I don't think that slavery is tolerable, whether it's slightly gray or heavily gray. All of that should be intolerable to us. I'm just waiting for you to somehow connect the dots from this discussion, on which no one would disagree, connect the dots over to, and therefore we have the right to use our government to take money from people because we think they have too much of it.
But
and give it to someone else because we think they don't have enough of it.
So
I want to hear those dots get connected.
So the dots are not only connected, we're at the same dot right now. Because indentured servitude, if there were indentured servants in the United States and we said, no more, this is now illegal and we are freeing these indentured slaves, all right? Well, what are we actually doing? What we're actually doing is breaking a contract made between that indentured servant and the person who bought their time. What do workers do when they go to their workplace at 8 a.m. in the morning? They're selling their time. On a shorter time scale, to be sure, and with less preconditions, but the link is right there. On a fundamental level,
you believe that because slavery is bad, we have the right to get rid of, or otherwise regulate, but including get rid of, any contract between any two people?
I think that there's a good reason why the government has rules when it comes to contracts and what you can and can't sell away. For example, indentured servitude...
That's not much of an answer to what I just said.
I'm not done. Indentured servitude is illegal in the U.S. You can't sign... Like, you could sign a contract saying that, but the government wouldn't recognize it as valid, you know, no matter who you signed it to. Now, I think that that's a good thing, because I think that sometimes in times of desperation, people might agree to legal contracts that are exploitative. And I think it's the right of the government to prevent that exploitation. I think that
governments don't have rights. Communities of people have rights to form a government and enforce criminal statutes, legal frameworks as they see fit to advance the interests of their society. Governments don't have rights.
The prevention of the exploitative contracts that I'm talking about. Now, I think that a lot of the labor that we do today falls under that purview. I think that we have a fundamentally exploitative system. It's not as bad as slavery. I won't pretend that it is, but I'm
still waiting for the dots to get connected. You said that this was somehow going to bolster your case, that this all means that we have the right to take property away from rich people and give it to someone else because you think it's a good idea. That's the argument on the table. I'm waiting for you to bolster it.
When we banned indentured servitude, we were literally taking property away from the wealthy. The property in this case was the signed time of the indentured servants. We've done this many times. We did this with the slave owners too.
I'm sorry, I can't give that to you. I cannot say because some people labeled humans as property that was somehow a precedent for therefore we can take people's money if they have too much of it.
No, indentured servants
just don't connect.
Indentured servants weren't considered property. However,
I can see now why I'm a libertarian and you're a socialist. I didn't think the divide was as big as it is.
Yes, I agree. There's a tremendous gap in understanding
very different
here.
Ethical frameworks.
No, but you don't know what your ethical framework is because you don't understand what I'm saying. Indentured servants weren't considered property. The contract of their labor and time was, because it was a guarantee. It was a contract they filed. It was no different functionally from signing a contract with any regular contractor saying that they will finish a job painting your building or whatever. It just lasted
No, I get
a
it.
long
You
time.
believe that because the government should have the right to abrogate certain contracts, that therefore also ought to have the right to take property from people.
So
I get it. I heard you.
You agree because you said the government should have the right to break indentured servitude bonds. So you agree then that there are times when the government has a right to take property from the wealthy because that is what that contract was. Not the person, but the contract. It represented an investment of wealth, of capital, that was the property of the person who bought the indentured servant. It was a servant, after all, not a slave. They weren't property, but their labor was entitled.
I heard you. By your argument, it would also therefore follow that because I don't think the government has the right to take property away from anybody, that in some sense you would say, I'm pro-slavery.
Oh, yeah, I do think you're that. Yes, but I have to get there. We have to build the ladder.
You're not very serious right now. That you think that it's a change somehow in ethical frameworks to be able to say both on the one hand, I don't believe in slavery, and I do think there are certain contracts that communities ought to have the right to abrogate on the one hand, and on the other hand,
some contracts should be banned.
You don't have the right to take property away from people. So I don't believe it's true that for those two things to coexist, you need two different ethical frameworks.
If you are arguing that the government has the right to break contracts on an ethical ground, You are arguing for the redistribution of property. You are taking time and labor that was promised by the indentured servant to the person who bought their time and labor. You are taking it and ripping it from the person who paid money for it and giving it back. This is functionally the same as the government intervening and saying, hey, this contractor that you paid to like retile your roof or whatever, no, they're not going to retile your roof, and you're not getting your money back. They keep the money, they don't retile the roof. This is unquestionably taking your property from you and giving it to the person who was going to tile your roof. You're in favor of that with the case of indentured servants. So the question is, when do we think it's okay? The difference is that
indentured servants have an element of coercion.
Well, hold on. I agree. So let's see if we can't find coercion in other places in our economy. So,
no, you don't have the right to say, because there's coercion someplace in the economy, I have the right to take someone's property away.
You just said that with indentured servants.
I'm not letting you go there. That's just silly talk.
Well, you just said that with indentured servants. You said, well, in this case, it's okay because there was coercion. I agree completely. So we're establishing then that if coercion is involved, the government should be able to break exploitative contracts, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so let's see if we can't find some coercion, all right? Let's say, hypothetically, that you're born in a poor household in the Midwest. You know, you don't have much money, and your family's kind of sick. You know, they kind of have some medical debt racking up. You've got to get a job, like, soon, like in high school, right? Like, you got to get started real quick, okay? Now,
I get it. I went to work in high school. I get it.
Right. So, I mean, so did I, yeah. So we are now faced with a situation where you have a choice of just a few jobs. Now, do you not think there is an element of coercion in forcing a person to choose between a localized regional market when it's entirely possible that the conditions or the pay at any of these places could be below par, unacceptable?
The big difference between you and me is that you believe in some sense the environment, the world, the economy, the system, the man, that big blob out there that is hard for people to understand, is in some sense a thinking, living being, some godlike creature maybe, that forces people to do things. You said, oh, do you think it's okay to force people? No, I don't believe it's okay to force people. But you are using as the object in your sentence, the subject of your sentence, to be some amorphous thing that you refuse to define. You said that because the situation they're in, they're being forced to do something. I got to ask you, by whom?
Okay, that's a great question. I'll ask you that question about the indentured servants. Who forced them into those contracts?
It's not the force into the contracts. It's the force once the contracts are engaged that is the element of coercion. Indentured servitude is unethical because of the way that coercion plays a role in propagating them.
How? That's a contract. If you break a contract, you can be liable in both criminal and civil senses. That's the case like in basically every job. How is that coercion?
Indentured servitude, and maybe you and I are having a discussion past each other because we have different definitions of indentured servitude. Indentured servitude in the traditional sense, and maybe you want to switch definitions, and I'll follow you if you give me what your definition is. But indentured servitude typically means that you promise to give a certain amount of labor over time, and that if you don't, your employer has some right to coercion to enforce that contract.
That's all business contracts. If you are a contractor, or if you
you have to go to court to make it happen.
That's what they would do with indentured servants. They weren't slaves. They couldn't just kill them or whatever. Like if they had a contract for 6 years on the farm.
And no, we do not believe in this country. You and I agree on this, that neither the government nor anyone else should have the power of coercion to force someone to perform labor.
Then where's the coercion with the indentured?
We put under the generalized category of slavery.
Well, where's the coercion with the indentured servant? It's a contract. You sign the contract
because it can only be enforced through coercion.
No, but the coercion you're describing is present in many existing labor contracts. If you sign a contract as a
No,
contract
you
worker,
think it is, but it's not.
no, no,
You
no, no.
keep finding it like the boogeyman under the bed.
No, listen, for
This does
indentured
not
servants
lead
and
to
for
some amorphous belief that when people go and get work, they're being forced by the
so
system.
no, listen. So the thing that I'm about to describe is true for both indentured servants and many workers in the US today, okay? You need money, a lot of us do. So you sign a contract where you promise to do a certain amount of work over a given length of time. You agree to conditions, you're signed in, and now you're going for it. You get an upfront payment, you get paid along the way, whatever. And then if you break the terms of that contract, you could be open to civil litigation, or if it's severe enough, criminal litigation against you. That is equally true for both
Criminal
indentured servants,
involved.
for both indentured servants and for and for many workers today. So where's the coercion? That's
Yes, apples in my house are both red. That doesn't mean I can eat
wait.
the
Then
house.
what's the difference? Why is the indentured servant coercive or being coerced upon, but not regular salaried contract workers?
I'll explain it for the third time.
Okay.
Indentured servitude includes an element of coercion for enforcement. And that enforcement takes the form of requiring the labor itself to continue. No court would make such a claim on a person's labor in the modern American state, and correctly so. We all agree on this.
Wait, no, that's not true. If you stopped working as an indentured servant, then you could be faced with penalizing fees that would send you to debtor's prison, or if what you did was bad enough, you could be sent to like criminal jail. And the same is
And
the
that's
case.
why we don't tolerate it, because we don't tolerate coercion.
But no,
to
this
force
happens
someone-
today. You can break a contract and ruin your life for it. This is a thing that exists right now. The element of coercion that you're describing is
I'm sorry,
present.
do you know someone who quit his job and went to jail for it? This
I
is
know,
a very
I know,
weird
I know.
thing. Please.
37 people who did, yes. But also, if you quit your job,
I think that's a more interesting topic than arguing about the definition of indentured servitude.
If you
we should have a
quit your
podcast
job-
about these 37 people.
If you
What happened?
If you quit your job when you're contracted to continue labor, you can be sued for it in civil court, and your life can be ruined. If you quit your job in a way that brings about some criminal negligence, which is possible though difficult to do, then you could be faced with criminal.
Very difficult to do. I mean, we're talking about walking out in the middle of a surgery if you're a doctor. No, it's very difficult.
Actually, yeah. No. Wait, hold on. Isn't that coercive? Why should a surgeon not be able to just walk out mid-heart transplant? Like, to do otherwise would be slavery because the state would be coercive.
You've adopted a certain liability that is understood. This is where torts come from. This is where civil liability.
Same as indentured servants.
You're just being silly.
No,
I think you're kidding.
No,
me.
the thing that you can't understand
You
here
insult your intelligence.
is that labor, the relations between laborers and the bourgeoisie, has been fundamentally the same at its core. It is only transformed in its kindness. Slavery, serfdom, indentured servitude, sharecropping, the modern day workplace, it still describes the fundamental relationship between owner and operator, between proletariat and bourgeoisie. The only question is, how many barriers are there between what we live with and the just barest skinflint human existence possible? What are the layers that protect us from going all the way back to the BC era? What keeps us from that point? And the truth to that, and the only thing that has ever protected us from that, is law. Hard, concrete law, protections, specifically protections for the weak against the powerful. Corporations are powerful. Individual citizens, regular people, are hideously weak. They're weak against corporations. They're weak against the government. We must do everything in our power to use law to empower the weak and weaken the strong. Because if we don't do that, then we're essentially just enabling feudalism all over again. There were plenty of laws back in feudal empires. You know, they had them too. And those laws existed to reinforce the material ruling power of the people who were in charge, and ours do today as well, which is precisely why people in Wall Street can steal millions and get 18 months in prison if we're lucky, whereas people like you and I, if we got caught like shoplifting from a 7-Eleven, we could get one of 3 strikes that would send us to jail forever. Like, the law still exists to protect the powerful, but you want to make it protect the powerful even more. You want to strip away protections from the working man. And that's the thing I don't get. That doesn't make people free. Nobody gets freer when they aren't guaranteed a minimum wage or working protections or OSHA. They're made less free because now their life gets constricted and the people on top get wealthier.
I'm pretty sure that there was absolutely nothing in that monologue that was true. I'm
Huh.
trying to find a piece of it that may have been, and it just wasn't. I'm sorry. The 19th century is calling. They've asked for their sociology back. You would
What
benefit
exactly
from
did I say that
getting
was
a
incorrect?
job.
You can
You would
gesture if you
benefit from
want, but I
getting a
want
job with a corporation.
specifically, what did I say
And
there that was incorrect?
I would have to replay the whole thing
So
because I don't
nothing.
think
So
there was anything.
you didn't catch
The
anything wrong.
fundamental your fundamental premise, let's start with that. The first thing you said is that the relationship between people and employers is fundamentally the same as between slaves and slave owners, and between indentured servitude, indentured servants, and their masters. And none of that is true. None of that is true. If you've ever worked for a corporation, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, you would see that you can quit and you won't go to jail. And indeed, if you have the
Not
right
surgeons,
skills,
though.
yeah, surgeons quit all the time. You ought to
Not
know that.
yeah, but apparently they are slaves mid-operation because if they quit right then you think the state should have the power to send them to jail simply for choosing not to participate in their job anymore.
Well, first of all, I didn't say that because I wouldn't say that because I don't agree with it.
So you do. So
Torts
you
and
believe in
civil,
freeing surgeons then?
I believe in freeing everybody. Surgeons are a small sliver of that. Yes.
So they should be able to
Look,
walk
if
off mid-surgery?
no, absolutely. If you engage in an activity in which you agree to take on a certain amount of liability, you will be held accountable.
Like an
Uh,
indentured servant's contract.
in No, I realize it's your favorite phrase, but it really has nothing to do with the relationship between a patient and a doctor. If you take on certain liability in an employment relationship, you may have to be held accountable. It's that way for lots of high liability employees. Police officers, for example. I worked as a cop for 11 and a half years. And others, heavy equipment operators, for example, there's a certain amount of liability
Held
there. Things
accountable
can
how?
go wrong, even among good faith operators.
How should they be held accountable?
I believe, well, in the case of police officers, I'm a big advocate for reforming the way that we manage police officers. I believe that officers ought to be required to carry their own liability insurance. Typically, officers are held without liability, either because of the doctrine of qualified immunity at the federal level, which doesn't affect that many cases, or by their employers, depending on the particular situation. But if officers were required to carry their own liability insurance instead of at the employer level, then to the extent to which officers had a history of misbehaving or not operating in a good, safe manner, their premiums might be driven up. They could be priced out of the market. And of course, that's how we want it to work. We want market forces to be brought to bear to improve their performance in every industry, and police work should be no different.
I mean,
Similarly, we want teachers to be subject to market forces. It's one of the reasons why, and maybe this is an area where you and I can agree because we all wish the teachers made more money. Maybe we don't all wish that. Uh, I think that there are some societal benefits that could come with the various forces that would drive up the wages that teachers earn.
what
If there
forces?
was
What
well,
would you do?
if there was greater competition for teachers, uh, all too often they're either monopolies or virtual monopolies held by public school systems. It's very difficult, of course, for private schools to compete because they don't have access to the funds that governments collect for the purpose of
But there's a
primary and
teacher shortage.
secondary education.
There's a shortage of
What's that?
teachers. Shouldn't their wages be skyrocketing? There's a shortage of them.
Well, it's the reason that teachers' salaries are as high as they are. I'm just suggesting that if there were greater competition, because there isn't much
No,
competition
they're not
typically.
high. They're very low. And they're low despite a teacher shortage. This seems to
We're
be another
saying that
instance in
it
which your
would
market
benefit
forces
teacher
are not.
wages if there were greater competition for teachers.
Does it ever like give you pause that your hypothetical market forces don't actually seem to exist in the real world, and you always have to explain away why obvious instances of a market failure don't represent your beautiful like
I'm
supply
sorry,
demand
there's a
graph?
market failure. Do you know what those words mean?
Yeah, a market failure.
Describe to me the market failure in teacher labor markets.
Sure, I'd be happy to describe it for you. A market failure in this case would be the fact that, in spite of the fact that there's a teacher shortage and teaching is an objectively necessary profession, the market forces that provide incentives for teachers to sign up and become employed are not operating in such a way as to address the shortage. This teacher shortage has been going on and getting worse for decades now. So the market is failing to fix the problem in this sector, in spite of the fact that, again, like,
All right, that's not what that's not what the words market failure mean, but at least now I know what you're talking about. No, the labor market for teachers
what
actually
does market failure mean then? Just so I know.
Yeah, market failure means that there's something that happened in the market that prevents it from clearing. Uh, that there are in this particular case, for example, it would mean there's a whole bunch of teachers, but they can't take the jobs because maybe some law kept them from taking the jobs, and therefore the shortage continued. For some reason, supply and demand just broke down and didn't functionally operate.
I just Googled it. A market failure refers to the inefficient distribution of resources that occurs when the individuals in a group end up worse off than if they had not acted in rational self-interest. So given the fact that, in spite of the fact that it is in society's rational self-interest to have a fully employed staff of teachers, and we don't have enough teachers, and also the teachers are dramatically underpaid, and this isn't changing, it would seem like in this case, the individuals in this group are ending worse off because the system forces at play are simply
Who is the group that's worse off?
I suppose in this case would be all of us, but also the unemployed teachers.
No, that's again, no, that's not what market failure. Market failure does not mean that the world does not work the way that Vouch thinks it should work.
Wait, no. It's not working the way you're saying it should have already worked. You're saying that I'm
saying the market works the way it works. I'm not making an interesting statement.
I agree tautologically the market works the way it works. I'm just saying it doesn't work the way you think it does. Because in your logic, a lack of teachers would lead to them being paid more. This is classic supply-demand stuff, and yet it hasn't. What is causing this problem? Could it be that things are more complicated than Econ 101, and in reality there are other forces that conspire to keep people poor and miserable outside of just supply line graphs? Why is it that university professors are paid jack shit while coaches of professional teams are paid millions of dollars? In spite of the fact—
I'm sorry, university professors are paid jack shit? When's the last time you noticed? I'm sorry, that's almost funny. University professors are paid quite well compared to the amount of work that's expected out of them. I can't give you that one. You might be able to slide that one by some guys, but not this one.
I'm sorry. What do you?
Teachers
how much do you think they're? How much do you think university professors are paid?
How much do I think they're paid?
Yeah. What? I'm sorry, I can Google the stuff on the fly, but in my experience between the university that I went to and the universities of people that I've talked to who went to, frankly, nicer universities than me, it's that, like, the professors who are getting paid well are, like, the upper tier of, like, adjunct, highly tenured professors who have been rotting in their chairs since the 60s, and meanwhile, underneath them, there's this gigantic underclass of, like, younger professors and, like, graduate students who are desperately trying to pick up the slack. So,
why do you think that they work so hard to desperately get a position at the university?
Because because it's a desirable job, but then they don't.
Why is it? You're onto something. Keep going. Why is it a desirable job?
Because that's what they do with their degrees. Because half of degrees that you get at a university are basically just getting the education to teach other people how to get the same degree.
That's wrong. Keep trying.
Do you think people become university professors for the money?
People want to become university professors for a range of reasons.
Okay. I think it's generally because when people go into a highly learned field, one of the desirable end states of that is teaching other people the subject that you've learned. I don't think that people get into like
Sure,
professorship as a
absolutely.
money-making scheme for the most part.
So all of a sudden you're feeling sorry for these people that are working so desperately hard to get into the profession. I'm not sure how you connect those
Well,
dots.
a lot of those graduate students who are working desperately hard are getting like paid basically nothing or literally nothing despite doing the work of a professor because the university is too
Right, we're
cheap to
talking about
hire
people trying
professors.
to get work in a university.
It's
They go to
basically like
work
an
as
unpaid
an assistant
internship for a lot of
professor.
them.
They work their butts off to try to get a tenure track position or try to
No,
get a
like
promotion to
graduate
adjunct.
students are doing the work
These
of
are very
professors.
desirable positions
Okay,
in the long
so wait,
run.
the undergraduates are doing the work of professors because the university isn't
I think you meant
hiring enough
graduate students. You
professors.
meant graduate
Yes,
students.
graduate students are doing the work of professors because the university isn't hiring enough actual professors to teach everyone. So graduate students are teaching courses or they're filling in for professors that have too many courses to manage.
Right.
Or
It's a way for university to save money. There's no question about that. It's
okay,
also a great way for graduate students to get experience teaching and learning the material. I did it. I was happy to do it. I was lucky to get the job as a teaching assistant. And you're right. There were days when you felt like you're working your butt off, and your boss, the professor, has got it made pretty good. But I don't think that
so
anyone felt like he was underpaid.
So we're talking about, because I knew graduate students who were literally not getting paid, or the most they were getting paid was like, it would like minimum wage or something to do
Yeah,
university
that's
professor
right.
work. Now we agree this is because the university wants to save money. So is it possible that there are systems where the greed of the people on top supersedes what might be otherwise considered a rational economic goal? Like, say, for example, having
No,
enough
saving
teachers.
money is a rational economic goal.
Not if we don't have enough
Uh,
teachers to teach our kids in a
creating
public school at that.
creating an opportunity for graduate students to develop their skills is a rational goal for the graduate
Yeah,
students.
oh yeah, I'm sure them not
I
getting
don't feel
paid
like I
is
was
also a
particularly
rational goal.
exploited. It helped me pay my way through grad school teaching the undergrads.
So you got paid. Not all of them get paid.
A
How
little,
much did you get
yeah. I
paid?
mean, it's not much. What they pay you, the way they pay you, of course, is mostly in tuition dollars. The vast majority of the payment is in, waiving the fees for
Interesting. So
tuition.
you accrue a large debt and then people desperately work it off for lower than the wage of people doing comparable work because they have a large debt. I wonder if I've seen this before in any like history lessons. Like I wonder if there's a
Anyway,
comparable
back to teachers.
back to yeah, so it is not economically rational to have a
Well,
system
of
where there is a
course it
teacher
is.
shortage.
The teachers are not being coerced into either taking the job or not
Oh
taking
my
the job.
God. So wait, hold on. What is
Teachers,
so no, wait. So we're coming up against like the fundamental misunderstanding that you have over economics, all right? People who become teachers
oh, do school
become
me,
teachers. I'm
please.
happy to. People who become teachers do so because they want to teach, not for the wages. Nobody becomes an elementary school teacher for the money. That's insane. Nobody does that.
Nobody does it for free.
First of all, that's not even true because there are tons of people who work in like subsidiary or side economic groups or do volunteering who would happily teach for free. But leaving that aside, yeah, we
Well, there
need to
are
pay
people that do that, and there
People
are plenty
need
of
to
people who
pay.
become
Yeah,
teachers because it pays pretty good,
people
and you get
need
the summers
no.
off
Hold
too.
on,
But
no. Being a teacher does not pay good. One, two. People need to pay rent. So this is the element of coercion that I would argue is present in getting any job in a market system that we have right now. Is that
okay, that's
you,
not what the word coercion
no,
means. You
no,
might
it's
want to
not. Wait,
Google a
wait, stop,
definition of that
It's
real
not.
quick
It's not what
too.
the word coercion means to you because your definitions are wrapped up in a cult-like understanding of economics that has nothing to do with the real world. Coercion is just anytime you're pressured into doing something. If you're being pressured by the state or being pressured by the fact that you will starve to death if you don't do a thing, those are both forms of coercion. If you want to
So you're
argue,
suggesting that our entire economic system is
you've
coercion.
got it. And as a libertarian, if you disagree with me on that, then you're faking it and LARPing. Because any libertarian would agree with that statement right there. Because
I'm sorry,
you
did you
should
say LARPing?
yes, because you should believe, if you're consistent in your ideology, that all of this is coercive because government regulations set up market forces in a way that interfere with the natural functionality of the market. You arguing that this isn't coercive and that the market is working as intended with our teacher shortage is a failure not only in my ideology but yours, which makes me wonder again what kind of libertarian you are. Because I know
Look,
libertarians, and they would not look at our current
the
teacher shortage
shortage
and
of
go,
teachers is something that you characterize as such. It's not a,
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
you
whoa,
know,
whoa, whoa.
now we
Wait,
have,
elaborate. What do you mean?
okay, you've decided, right? As a number of people have. I'm not singling you out. I'm not saying that you're right or wrong. But the reason that you say that there's a teacher shortage is because you look at the difficulty of hiring teachers and you call that a shortage. But the truth of the matter is that those markets do clear. All I'm saying,
What do you
I
mean
didn't mean
clear?
to
Wait,
say,
wait, I'm not asking for how it's okay in your definition. I'm telling you how, like, we have a shortage. The shortage isn't being made up by socialists. The shortage is we have class sizes that are getting to 40 or 50 students per teacher, and we know empirically that this negatively affects their education. The purpose of public
right.
education is to give
So we
people an
should hire
education.
more
So
teachers.
why aren't they?
Why aren't, I'm sorry, who's the they?
The public school systems.
Okay. Why aren't public schools hiring more teachers? Is that the question?
Yes.
You tell me.
I'm asking you, I know why it is. It's because the administration on top, the bloated administration that sits on top of every school district, which has hired like 78 additional like meaningless secretaries and middlemen for every teacher they hire, just want to make more money. It's the same system as private ownership. At the end of the day, you have the people on top and the
You're
people on
saying that
bottom.
school systems don't hire more teachers because the administrators want to make more money.
Yes, the bloat of the administrative school system. You can Google it. The number of like administrative workers per
It's
teacher
huge.
has gone up over time, and it corresponds to a
At
higher class
universities
size.
too.
Yes, in universities too, because the
Yep.
administration has the power, not the teachers. The teachers don't decide whether teachers get hired. It's in the self-interest of people in power
Okay.
to maintain.
Notwithstanding all that silliness, let's get back to what we were talking
What's
about.
silliness? What was silly about the administration bloat? How is that silly? That's a real thing.
It is a real thing. That's not the reason why more teachers aren't being hired, but it is a real thing.
Then
You
why aren't
connect a
more
lot of
teachers?
dots that don't have logical connections.
Then why
Why don't
aren't
we
more
go back
teachers being
to
hired?
what you asked me 10 minutes ago?
Well, I just want to know why more teachers aren't being hired.
Why more teachers aren't being hired, right?
Yes.
Okay. School boards make these decisions about how many teachers to hire based on the uh, budget that they're allocated, right? The budgets have been eaten up by a number of reasons, including salaries have come up somewhat over the years. And you're right, the administrative blob that sits on top of that has eaten up a lot of the money. There's no question about that.
Okay, is that rational?
Is it rational?
In a social sense, if we are designing a functioning society, is it rational that administrative bloat gets to eat up a larger and larger amount of the money that public school systems have, and at the same time there seems to be no
I think
money
what
to
you
hire
mean
new
is
teachers?
is it optimal? No, it is not optimal. What you would want in an optimal setting is for a force like competition, which is what has driven most performance excellence in the rest of the American economy, but seems not to be able to touch the American primary and
How
secondary
would
public
competition
school
fix it? What would they do?
industry. There should be competition among the providers of education so that it would drive out the bloat that you and I both agree and recognize should not be there.
How would we make that happen? Like, what law or what thing would make that happen?
What you would do is make the funds that are used now for only one competitor in the industry to be available for multiple competitors in the industry, so that you would have presumably multiple competitors from the private sector competing with the public sector, maybe even multiple public sector competitors, I suppose, theoretically. You ought to have competition for providing those services.
We've already done this with school voucher systems, with charter schools,
Yeah,
and with private schools.
For the most part, they work pretty well.
No, it doesn't. The administrative bloat and teacher shortages continue there too. It happens everywhere. Listen,
in some places,
the number of district administrators in U.S. public schools,
performance of the schools themselves show that it's an improvement.
No.
And by the way,
that is not true.
It's absolutely
Well,
true,
no,
Raj.
it's definitely not true. Generally speaking, schools that are in nicer areas that get more money tend to have better educational outcomes for obvious reasons. But what we're talking about
Absolutely.
right now is fixing like schooling broadly. That means schooling in the ghetto. That means schooling in East Los
That's the
Angeles.
primary target of where we need to make improvements. I hope we agree on that.
We've tried doing these charter schools, like private school gets partial funding stuff. We've tried these before. It doesn't fix the issue. It actually worsens it because when students have the ability to go to any school rather than the one they're currently in, all of them flock into the nice school where all the white people are in their Upper Hills neighborhood, and all of the schools that were in like the hood beforehand rot and die because half the students, the ones with parents who have the free time to drive them to the other school, have left, and they no longer get all the money that you would get like for the
Right.
students.
That's not exactly what we mean by a competitive. I appreciate you picked out an example that does happen from time to time, but what we're talking about is making the funds available for the creation of new competitors, right? Whether that's in the private school system or the public school system. We're not talking about everybody use a lottery system to cram into the nice school. What we're talking about is creating an opportunity for people to go to a competitive school in the same geographic area, perhaps, that is providing an education in the private sector or in the public sector.
Why wouldn't
And in
they
this
just
way,
have the
you would
same
create,
administrative
well,
bloat?
just hold on for a minute. You're going to make me explain school choice as though you've never heard it
No, I
before.
have.
But
I just explained why it doesn't work. We literally have data
well,
on school
empirically
choice.
speaking, we know that it does.
No, empirically speaking, we know
And
that it does in the one school that gets selected within the city that all the poor people flock to, while 6 other schools in the neighboring areas
okay,
die out. No,
look,
we
the
have data on
performance
this.
of
I've read the
charter
data. You
schools.
can't lie to me. I've read the data on this. I know how school choice happens. This is why Republicans support it, because they want things to go better for the ultra wealthy people who will be packed up to capacity and get all the money from the state. Meanwhile,
Look, maybe
all the poor
you've met a
schools will rot.
Republican who fits. Maybe you've met a Republican who fits that. I know you like to project motivations
The
onto people
GOP
with whom
loves
you
school choice.
disagree.
They talk about it all the time.
I love school choice, and I have no tolerance for people who want to cram money into certain high-end schools. So I hope you don't mistake me for one of these
That's
Republicans
what
with
school
weird
choice
motivations
does.
that you claim.
It fills the nicest school in the area up to capacity because every parent capable of driving their student, their child, over to it will. Meanwhile, once that's at capacity, all you've done is tear money away from the schools
Okay,
that were
that
already
is not a
underperforming.
that is not a school choice program. What you're describing is a program in which people have the right to change from one public school to another. Uh, that's probably a good program too. It's got problems, whatever. I don't want to talk about that. What we're talking about is school choice. Okay, school choice is a program by which private sector and public sector can compete. Hopefully multiple private sector organizations compete to provide these services. The reason it's important, let's finally get back to the
We
question that
have
you asked
private
20 minutes
schools.
ago. The reason it's important is, yes, to provide better education, including driving out the bloat that you and I both identify in lots of public
We
school
already have
systems.
private schools,
And
and they bloat as well.
private schools typically do not bloat. They run extremely thin because they don't have much access to funds. Some of the very most high-end schools that charge, $20,000 a year in tuition, sure, I'm sure some of them have bloat.
How what do
But
you
if you're
think
talking
what do
about
you
the
think the
typical
pay
Catholic
difference
school,
is between the person who owns and runs the private school, like a dean or an administrator, versus the teachers? Out of curiosity, what do you think the pay difference is? I don't actually know. I can look it up and see.
look, I've been involved with Catholic schools and Lutheran schools, so I apologize for knowing more about this than you do. The people who run those
Wait, then answer the
schools,
question.
yeah, the people in those schools that I've worked with don't make a dime more than the teachers. But I'm sure you have examples where, some dean or some headmaster makes a lot more. Good for you for having such an example.
Well, I know
The
it's a
point of
I
the
know it's a
story
huge
is
issue.
that competition would improve not only the education for the kids, but over time would increase the wages to the teachers. Right now, we don't have robust competition for teachers In most geographic areas, it's
There's a
one school
there's a
board, love it or
shortage.
shove it. But competition for the best teachers would drive up their wage rate.
Wait, hold
It's one
on.
of the
Wait.
reasons
There
why
are so many
unions are not
flaws.
doing their teachers any favors by precluding that
How
competition.
is there not a competition for teachers in private schools when there is a teacher shortage? If there's a
The
shortage,
private
there should be a.
schools, the private schools don't have much access to funds. They don't have, typically, they don't have access to the public funds at all. In some places,
Why
they're
would the
starting to
public
now.
fund
And
private schools?
the funds are there for education.
Okay, then go to a public school. Why should I, a taxpayer, be funding a private? Why?
Why should you be funding a public school?
Because it's a public school. Because it's part of the government that I pay taxes into. Why should those taxes
Right.
go
Why should your
to?
government, right? You give money to your government to provide a service to your community.
Uh-huh.
Why should your why should your government be precluded from hiring anybody that it thinks would do a good job? You don't require it to only hire public sector garbage men.
Because I don't
You
want.
don't.
Yeah, wait, hold on. I disagree with that. I hate that. I don't like the fact that the government contracts services out. But for public education, this is a different issue because if you're like contracting garbage men, it's like, okay, whether they're public or private, they're going to get the garbage. It's kind of like they do the job or they don't. When it comes to public or private education, though,
I'm sorry. I
the
can't give you
quality.
that either. There's a wide
No, no, no.
range
Wait,
in
stop,
quality
wait,
of
wait, stop,
service
wait,
and
wait, hold on,
garbage.
wait.
I
Can't,
come
wait,
from
can't,
a long
hold
line
on.
of garbage
Can't,
men
wait,
as
wait,
a Dutch
please,
Chicagoan.
please. Can the fake indignation? You know perfectly well that a good job done by a public and a private garbage company or garbage service functionally remove the garbage, whereas there are massive differences in private and public education, considering that a huge number of our private education is run by religious fanatics. Like, it's not just that it's being given to a private source. It's also that the kind of education is completely different in a lot of these places.
I'm sorry. I just don't agree with any of that, including my fake indignation.
Wait, you
As
don't
someone
agree
who
that
has come
private
from,
schools are often religious?
that is not what you said.
That they're often religious and that this affects their education. A lot of these are like private Catholic or Christian schools.
Yes, that's not what you said earlier.
Did you really want to argue over public versus private garbage collection services?
First of all, yes.
Okay, I really still want to know how exactly any of this is going to address the fact that we have a teacher shortage, considering the fact that private schools are already a thing and there's a shortage of teachers, and for some reason there isn't like this big competition that you say should be happening. Where's the money for it?
The money exists in the public school system, right? The communities typically collect money to provide primary and secondary education for the kids, right? So don't make me explain what you already know. The communities collect money for this purpose. They then typically allocate it to public school systems. This is different than the way a lot of other services, yes, like garbage men. I'm sorry if that's for some odd reason a weird example for you, but a lot of other services, the government doesn't just limit itself to providing this service in the public sector. There's no economic reason. I don't think there's any philosophical or ethical reason why the business of education, the service of education, should be provided by public sector employees instead of on a contractual basis. In particular, if you would open yourself up to, I don't mean you, I apologize for that reference in the second person, if the school systems, if the people with the money, I should say, if the communities would open themselves up to the idea of contracting either public sector employees or private sector employees to providing this service, they would create competition to provide that service. This would improve the quality of education, of course. It would also create competition for the best teachers, particularly if the teacher unions would allow for the competition to take place on the basis of teacher quality. Right now, unions typically preclude teachers from being evaluated on performance, just the same way police unions preclude such evaluations, and they're doing teachers or police officers no favors by precluding this type of competition. This would raise the wages for the teachers. It would potentially bring in more teachers to the system, but more importantly, it might bring in a different batch of teachers if the wage rates were higher.
Right now, there are people who want to be teachers, who are qualified to be teachers, and there are public schools that have too few teachers. Why are those public schools not hiring? Ah, we already answered this. It's because of the administrative bloat. We already answered this question. It doesn't have anything to do with unions. It has to do with the people in charge of how the money gets spent, spending money on themselves. We literally already answered this. The reason the money isn't there is because they're spending it on themselves. That's the administrative bloat. The only way to address this is by axing that administration, making sure the money goes to where it needs to go. This is a public school.
And the way you do that, agreed. And the way you do that is by allowing organizations to compete to provide this service. It's the way that it happens in every other business. It ought to happen in the business of teaching as well.
No. People are geographically locked to their schools. Parents work.
They are now, but they shouldn't.
No. We live in a thing called space-time. We can't teleport. Parents work.
No, if but we could create more schools in those areas if we had competition.
No, we can't. No. Creating more schools just splits students between the existing ones and makes it worse for the existing institutions. You can't just create 5 schools.
How? Why does that?
Because public schools are paid based on the number of students that go there.
Right. Well, how would it make those schools worse?
Because they would have less money.
They would have less students. So how does the ratio of money to students change?
Because the upkeep on the building and the administrative bloat that we agree is a problem doesn't scale proportionally to the number of the students. If you cut the student base in half, the costs of running the school does not get cut in half. Now you just have a half-populated school where the grade sizes are half for everyone and students wander empty halls listening to their footsteps echo because some idiot thought that it would be a good idea to open up a private school half the size 3 blocks down that, again, not enough people are going to because you're building too many schools for the area that you're in. And you're locked geographically because parents work in the morning and not every area has a school bus that's going to run 47 minutes down a highway to get people from one part of town to another. This is a fixable problem, but you only want to fix it in ways that are your beloved market, the market that you worship and preach for. This is not how you do things. You do it with regulation. The administrative bloat, that's a regulatory problem, baby. Axe that shit. And you know what? Public schools are not the only institution where the main problem is the greed of the people on top who get to make the decisions. Because as it turns out, competition between corporations also historically has not led to massive increases in wages.
I would argue that the main reason for administrative bloat in school systems is more incompetence than something evil.
No, they want to make more money for themselves. The administrative bloat is just the administrative state, the regulatory system, wanting to make more money for itself. And the regulations need to be curtailed appropriately. Competition won't fix this. You know what competes?
Competition would absolutely fix this. You don't see this in any other industry. Why do you see it in schools?
Target and Walmart compete, okay? Now, what are workers at Target and Walmart paid?
What? I'm sorry. You're asking me what the wage rate is in the Kmart?
Yeah. What are workers paid at Target and Walmart, the 2 primary competing big box stores in the United States?
By the hour? Where are we going? Help me out.
How much are they paid?
Throw me an answer. So
how much are they paid? They're competing. They're competing on a huge scale. The amount of money going on between Target and Walmart exceeds that of like European medieval wars.
Right,
I mean,
and they are an excellent example of organizations that are run ruthlessly efficiently. Those people don't have much bloat in them at all.
Oh, really? Except for
my point.
Oh, really? So there's nobody who works at Target then who's getting paid a lot of money? No bloat? Not even at the top?
I'm sure there are, but those organizations are known for running with efficiency that is absolutely ruthless. That's efficiency the reason most people are mad at them, not because they're run with bloat.
Efficiency for who?
I'm sorry, you and I were just discussing administrative bloat, were we not?
Yeah, here, hold on. Wealth
Okay,
of
Walmart and
Walmart
Kmart.
family. Hold on. It's Target. Hold on. The
Target.
Walton family fortune is broken down as such: 66.9 billion, 66 billion. The total fortune between all of them,
Are you going to try to
191
convince me that the Walmart family is the administrative bloat? That the Walmart family is actually
The
what
fact that
in the back running
you
that
don't
thing?
already know that is why you're a cultist. Yes, 191 billion to one family? That's worse than any administrative bloat in any public system in any country on the planet. Are you kidding? I bet you I couldn't find that kind of bloat in a single government office in China. Jesus Christ.
I see how you win your arguments. You change the definition of your terms
that's you.
as you go.
This is why you're religious. Because to you, bloat can only mean wasting money on anything but the people who own it. In your mind, bloat can only be when the working man gets more. Bloat can only mean the inefficiency that occurs when workers get paid more.
Money going to the administrators of the schools.
Yeah,
I didn't say that.
That's
I was
bloat.
working with your definition.
What is bloat to you, if not an enormous amount of money being concentrated in a tiny place while all the people who work at Walmart are on food stamps? Tell me, what is bloat? How is that 191 billion? How is that not bloat? It's pretty big. Pretty big amount of money. You stack that up in $100 bills and you would fill like a house. That's a lot. You couldn't even eat that many $100 bills.
It's a tremendous amount of money.
Bloat.
Is that the definition of bloat?
Yeah, it's waste. It's wasteful. All that going to one person, that's ridiculous. Imagine if you had a buffet.
Okay, is that the working definition
This is the Walmart buffet, all right? Now we're going to rationally distribute the food we have in these plates. All right, everyone gets exactly one Frito chip. Okay, everyone gets one little Dorito. Okay, and now we're going to build a warehouse to fill entirely with caviar, so one family can stare at it and rub their bellies appreciatively. Is this rational to you?
I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about bloat.
I am. They're going to get very bloated if they ever ate all that caviar, which they won't because it's too much for one family, which is kind of my point.
They have made a tremendous amount of money.
Of bloat, yeah, a lot of bloat.
Look,
like the administrative state.
I do believe...
Like the Communist Party of China.
I do believe that if other organizations had seen the direction that Walmart was going in decades earlier than they actually did, and had moved into those markets, to your point, I'm trying to agree with you, even though you've made a completely different point than what we were discussing with administrative bloat in the schools.
I'm still talking about
administrative bloat. I'll go with you
bloat.
to this new place, and I'll try to agree with you. Yes, it's a tremendous amount of money that they made. If other organizations had been able to recognize the tremendous fortunes that family would make by running Walmarts and the other types of stores under the Walmart family empire. If other organizations had been able to recognize that and had moved in to compete with them earlier, they might have been able to participate in some of that vast wealth, what you call bloat.
Then they could have had the bloat, yeah. You want me to look up Target's?
Yeah, the bloat would have been spread around. The bloat is what we call profit, by the way. It does have an actual word in the literature. You don't have to use the word bloat if you don't want
like
to.
The administrative, like the administrative bloat. The bloat I'm talking about is money that goes to the public school system.
No, it's very different. It needs to be treated very differently because
we're talking inefficiencies with the administration for the public schools. It's bloat because instead of hiring teachers, which we need as a society, instead they're spreading all the money around the administrative block. And here, while Walmart employees are all on like fucking welfare, you would have a
system that would drive down that bloat, potentially drive up the wages of teachers, improve the quality of education, improve the lives of teachers, probably improve the batch of teachers applying for those jobs. Same thing in Walmart. If the competition had been awake earlier than recently, there would have been greater service in those
so how much are people paid at Target?
And that would have made our lives better too.
So how much are people paid at Target, the competitor?
How much are people? I'm sorry, I just don't understand the question.
What are you so deaf to the needs of the working class that this question is nonsensical to you? How much are you paid working at Target?
The starting, I don't work for Target, so I assume this is some sort of metaphor. You're asking me how much people make at Target.
Okay, So the nice thing is that workers
Why
for
don't
both
you tell me
workers
what's
at
the
both,
starting wage
well,
rate at Target?
you know, it varies by state because it turns out
I'm sure it
it's
does.
basically
So what's
just the
the
state's
answer?
minimum wage.
Don't keep me in suspense.
I'm
What do people
it's the
make at Target?
minimum wage. They both get paid nothing. So what
They
is
get paid
competition
nothing.
doing?
They get paid nothing.
Uh-huh. So what's the competition doing? How is the competition fixing this issue? Where in America could I look and find these vaunted examples of regular workers getting paid large wages because of competition? It's not at Chipotle. It's not at any of the fast food places, even though they compete like all the time. Fast food places are literally fighting over franchises block by block. I mean, that's like an ongoing battle, and yet all their workers are minimum wage. Where could I find
These are
this?
extremely low wage jobs.
Oh, so there we go. So you're okay with them not being paid more because you think they're beneath you.
I'm sorry. Your projection of ethics, I don't know where you come off.
So why aren't they getting paid more?
They're in a low wage job?
Yeah, that's
Why?
tautological. I'm asking you, despite
No, you're
competition.
asking me why they are in low wage jobs?
No. I'm asking you why the competition in their field is not resulting in higher wages.
Than
minimum wage, the lowest amount they could possibly be paid.
You mean the lowest wage they could legally be paid?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
That is what possible means in the context of like legal payments. Yes, I suppose they could be like
right, but you
enslaved.
made it sound like an economic concept, which you mean is a legal concept.
Yeah, I agree that corporations would pay us all less if they could get away with it. So why are they not getting paid more? Because their industry is so competitive.
They are getting paid. You're right. They're getting paid more than if there was absolutely no competition.
They're being paid
still
minimum
very,
wage.
Very low wage jobs. They don't make very much money.
No. They are not getting paid more. No.
These areas
you misunderstand. Again, they're not getting paid more than they would be if there was no competition. They're getting paid the lowest amount. It's the minimum wage. So in spite of the competition...
It's the legal minimum, Vouch. It's the legal minimum.
That is the law. Yes, that is true.
Yes.
So they are so where is the example you could point to of competition raising wages for a bunch of workers? I know this works for like
over. The previous job that I had as a police officer.
No. Wait.
No competition.
Hold. Okay, I'm uninterested in the salaries of cops, save for how I could cut them. I'm interested in regular people. I'm sorry,
you were asking me where are these examples of people that get paid more because of competition?
Here are fields where I think that competition might actually positively affect wages for workers. Tech fields of very high specialty or skill, though not all of them, because teaching is one of those fields and it's not working for them. Cops, because they're of a different class character. Probably anything that involves like a high degree or like a specific role in society outside of just like wages that you could find or corporations you could roll between. So for something that you could just pick up like normally out of high school.
That the majority of work in the United States, majority of employment in the United States is subject to significant competition. And yes, the wages are higher than they otherwise would be if there weren't competition.
Then why are so many of them getting paid minimum wage, even in fields where there is robust competition?
Because those are, I mean, you're acting like you don't understand this.
I do understand it. I'm a Marxist. I'm fully aware of this.
Jobs
you have to jump through the hoops to
require very little skill. There are plenty of people that can do that. Supply and demand in the labor markets has come up with numbers that are very low. The minimum wage rates are set by state law that artificially raise those artificially relative to what supply and demand would suggest.
So they can eat. Yeah,
and
that's
so
good.
The wages are in effect at the bottom end, all set by the state.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's almost like the only force that was capable of elevating the wages of these common workers was the state and not your vaunted competition. You've made my argument for me. I agree. You're trying to convince like a regular worker, and you're like, hey, listen, there are two roads you could go, sonny boy. You could go with the state, which has raised your wages, or you can go with my way, which would remove that protection and you would make less. And you deserve to make less because the market wants to pay you less. And you might make more due to competition, but also your job is very low skill, so probably not. Do you think they're going to go with me or with you? Because historically, this is a winning battle for me. The minimum wage, like, this is settled science, you know? It's just...
It is settled science that minimum wage raises wage rates for the employed. That's not
Yeah.
science. That's just mere observation.
Observation's a big part of science. Yeah, that's a pretty huge part of it. And considering the fact
Well,
that
the
right now
part that you
people are
can't
struggling to
observe
pay
is how
rent,
many people are unemployed because of
we
it.
know the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate has held steady and not been affected by minimum wage increases. We have plenty of data on this. Like literally, you can Google
No, those
effects
two
of
things
minimum
don't
wage. No,
connect.
you
You
can
know that.
literally Google effects of minimum wage.
Okay.
No, no, no. Please, you're never too old to educate yourself. You can Google, because like, I don't know, we'll go with the data with you. You should know this. The effect of minimum wage increases on employment. And you can get an empirical answer. You might as well argue with the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. It's not something I have any interest in litigating. Look, with reality being what it is, and people barely being able to afford groceries and rent as it is now, why on earth would I ever accept an economic system where you're trying to sell me on the idea of, well, these people who are already struggling should just struggle more because the market has decided their wages are actually worth less than what the government has set them at a minimum level? Like, why should these people suffer more? Should the suffering here not be on the part of the bourgeoisie, the bloat, the Walmart family with 191 billion who sit there and waste it all?
We know empirically, we know because of research, and yes, you're right, we know because of theory that the way to improve lives most is by allowing transactions to take place based on free will, on a voluntary basis, and for the contracting of these transactions to take place at prices and with terms that are set based on free will and the
Like
opportunity to
indentured
make
servitude.
decisions for
Yeah.
ourselves. This is how we know that not only markets clear, but do so in a fashion that maximizes the benefit to both parties.
And yet we
When
have
you
a teacher
have
shortage while the administrative bloat continues, and we have Walmart workers
well,
on
we have
welfare
a
while the
teacher
family
shortage
who runs it.
because Vaush labels it as such. Okay.
Okay, so this is what I mean. This is your religion. Everybody in education agrees. We know that students get worse educational outcomes with these class sizes growing the way they have. You just don't give a shit. It's like a death cult that I'm listening to. Your God is your stupid Econ 101 graphs, and you're desperately trying to line a transparency film of it up to reality. And where it doesn't match, you smudge it a little bit, or you deliberately misinterpret the data. Like, seriously, because I've defined... Wait, do you think I just coined the term teacher shortage? Like, that's a thing that a socialist, just came up with?
I'm sorry, why don't we start over again?
As opposed to, like, the unanimous decision of everyone involved in education that, holy shit, this is like a worsening problem. Why would you even say that? You're indicating to me that you don't believe social problems are real unless they conform in some way to the disparity between your graphs and reality.
Social problems are real. The fact that we have crappy education in primary and secondary school systems in the United States is arguably the biggest policy failure in America for the entire century. And it is no coincidence that bad performance, and bad by the standards of other nations, bad performance by the standards of the rest of the U.S. economy, is aligned in these areas where we don't have any competition, and indeed preclude legally the competition by hoarding the money that the public collects for the purposes of these services and allocates them only to public
the nations that have better schooling than us.
Coincidence.
The nations that have better schools than us have public schooling systems. The countries that do better on us in educational formats are not doing so because of the robust private schooling system. These countries have better public education.
In many examples, that is true. Not uniformly, by the way, but in many examples, that is true. But our schools, by any measure, Vaush, stink.
I completely agree.
Every student, but at the low end, subjectively speaking, they stink. But objectively, if you measure it relative to performance in the past, you measure the low-end schools relative to the high-end schools, we have huge problems. The only way that we're going to get through that is not by trying the same things over and over again and doubling down on the idea that competition doesn't matter and that precluding competition in this one particular sector of the U.S. economy
there
and
are
saying,
teachers.
well, this is the place where we're not going to impose or allow competition.
The idea, listen,
shittiest
your model, this is not
in America,
up for debate.
Is illogical.
We have
Maybe you're the
countries,
one who doesn't care.
Mate,
maybe you're the one that's stuck on a religion.
We have
you're the one
countries,
who's not willing to try anything new.
We have countries that have done this better. All I'm doing is pointing at them. Better investment in public education, some laws that do a better job of making sure the money goes towards...
You're suggesting we should have more money?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's silly.
Wait, no, please,
primary and secondary education
we're so
per
close.
pupil
We're so close. We're so
skyrocketed,
close. We
and
do
the
not.
Performance
We're so
is
close.
not done
Please,
better at all.
Please,
we're not getting a good bang for our buck.
Please. Okay, listen. You can't just dump money into these systems. We need proper incentive structures, and then we put more money into them. That's what they do in countries with better educational outcomes.
Now you're onto something.
Yes.
How do you want to?
So the incentive structure is clearly not competition because, and you still haven't answered this because you know that you can't. We have a model right now where A, there's a teacher shortage, B, there are teachers who want to work, and C, there's a general discontent with the quality of education across the country, meaning that in any rational system, by your estimation, these administrative states that are operating in the school district should be cutting their own funding to hire more teachers because that will increase the quality of their school, which will mean that more students will go there, people will be happier, they'll get more money from the state, blah, blah, blah.
And why don't they?
Because that's not how economics works. Because not everything is solvable with a 101 graph. Other countries have done this.
No, you're saying that these organizations that are so well-motivated and so well-meaning aren't doing the right thing. Why
I'm not
aren't
saying they're well-meaning at all. Have you been listening? I'm saying that the administrative state at the top... So you're saying that
these school boards are evil. I would agree with you in some cases.
Yes, I agree.
They need to be subjected to competition.
No, you're not listening.
How are you going to correct them if not through competition?
We have competition.
What are you going to just appoint someone smarter
We already did this
them?
whole thing with big box stores and with fast food, and I was like, so why isn't the competition doing anything? And you were like, well, because actually, you know, competition is doing something, we just can't see it. It's invisible. Like, this is like clown economics, okay? Regulation. What raises the wage of the average worker? Regulation. What improves schooling? I don't know.
True.
Take a look at Europe. Regulation.
I'm sorry, regulation does not raise the wage rate of the average worker. The wage rate of the average worker is
then
driven
what
by the
exactly,
ratio of capital to
what
labor.
exactly is the federal minimum wage?
The
you literally
rate...
just said that fast food workers would probably be making less without the minimum wage, which I agree with, by the way. So the minimum wage then, as a corollary,
is not in
raising...
every case, but in many cases, yes. Right.
So it raises, that's the minimum wage raises...
I'm sorry, you can't just hop from one misstatement to another.
No, so wait, hold on. Does the minimum wage...
You just said that regulation increases the average wage rate in the United States.
Yes, with the minimum wage.
That is an absolutely silly statement.
Yeah, you just wait. So you literally I'm sorry. Wait, hold on. Really quickly, sir. Mike. Hold on. There's a serious issue here. Do you have a carbon monoxide detector in your house? All right.
Yes.
Okay. Can you check it for me right now? Because the statements you are making are consistent with severe oxygen deprivation. You just said that the wages of fast food workers would be lower were it not for the minimum wage. And I am agreeing that a regulation,
at the bottom end.
If you want to check how many workers in the U.S. are paid at or within $1 of the minimum wage, which is a huge number of them, you can. It's a significant percent. If we are in the agreement then that without the minimum wage they would be paid less, then the corollary argument is that yes, that regulation, the minimum wage, does in fact increase wages. Because otherwise they'd be paying less. They would be paid less otherwise. So now they're getting paid more. We don't have any evidence to indicate that the increase in minimum wage increases unemployment.
You seem like a nice fella. You seem like you mean well, and you seem like you're willing to work hard.
You can't answer this.
But the idea that the wage rate in the United States has come up over time because of regulation is just not a statement.
Well, we haven't raised the federal minimum wage in like 30 years. But yeah, you said that the minimum wage increased the wages of the fast food workers, which means that without it,
Some of the fast food workers, those at the very bottom, yes.
what
Which, and
what
as
what do
you
you
point
mean
out, that's a
some at
lot
the
of
very
people.
bottom of fast food workers? What is the robust what exactly is the spectrum of prestige and leadership in the fast food space? Are we talking going to corporate? Because I mean just like the job you get when you give a paper there. Like, I'm not talking about corporate. That's a whole different thing. You're not
I'm
working
sorry,
in
a
fast
moment.
food if you're at
Yeah,
corporate.
no, I'm sorry. I can't let you just change topics.
Well,
You
I'm
just said a
not.
moment ago that wages in the United States have come up because of regulation. No, wages in the United States have come up because of the accumulation of capital and technology.
Okay,
Period. Full stop.
okay, hold on. If we got rid of all
Can
minimum
we at least
wages in
agree
the
on
United
that? Can
States,
we at least
if
agree
we
on the
got
basics of
if we
economics?
got rid of all minimum wages in the United States, would if you can imagine all the wages in the US and then we get rid of the minimum wage all across the board, it's all free now, okay? Would people's wages on average go down or up? And follow up, why the would they go up? Like a corporation would go, "Oh, this tech worker who we pay 25 an hour, we no longer have to pay him a minimum of 725. Ah, I guess we'll pay him $30 an hour." Why what would it go down or up?
For those individuals who are directly affected by the minimum wage. Okay? Let's be clear, because I know you like to. In a minute from now, you're going to say that's not what you said.
Okay.
For the people who are affected by the minimum wage law, if you were to get rid of the minimum wage law, for many of them, their wages would go down.
Okay. So they would just starve.
Is that what you really believe?
Well, considering that people can barely afford rent and groceries on minimum wage, and then they would then be paid less than that, yes.
Okay.
You have to buy the food.
Yes.
Yes.
What is it you're asking me?
Okay. So we've arrived at a moral conundrum now, which is, should we let millions of people starve for no reason? Now, this is a tough one, I admit, okay? I'm a sociology major, not a philosophy major, and I'm only an undergrad at that. But I think I'm willing to give this one a shot. I think we shouldn't let them starve. I think they should make enough money to live.
I think so too. How's that?
Well, what if we, hypothetically, had a law that made it so everyone who worked could get enough money to live?
That would be interesting. There can be no such thing, but that is a very interesting little idea.
How can that not be?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I hurt your feelings?
No, now I'm wondering if my carbon monoxide is right. Just how can so there are literally countries that have this, including the United States, in the form of a minimum wage. How can we not do that?
If you were to take away the minimum wage, you would increase employment or decrease employment.
No. I asked you, why can't we just guarantee everyone who works gets paid enough?
Well, you can increase the minimum wage. You can certainly do that. You can increase it as high as you want. I don't know what the logical reason would be that you would stop it at $12 an hour or stop it at $15. I mean, why wouldn't you go to $20 an hour?
Yeah, why not? It's 15 here in Seattle, and people are still struggling to make ends meet. Why not 20?
Exactly. So why don't we make it? I don't know. 30 seems reasonable to me.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, I'm glad we came to a consensus on this.
What you don't think that would have any effect on the economy or employment?
If you want me to be like real for a second, like actually, I think that if we kept pace with the amount of
I've
worker
been waiting
power
for 2 hours.
and proportion, well, I've been serious this whole time. I'm being facetious like right now, but if we kept par with the amount of proportional worker pay that we would have been getting before like Reagan era anti-union and anti-worker deregulation, then I think that
Proportional, I mean, slide that one by me again. Proportional what?
the amount of money that the average American worker made proportional to the total GDP, the total amount of economic activity going on in the country, used to be much higher than it is now, and it grew at a consistent rate. Then deregulation took effect. I mean, obviously, the whole economic history of the past 100 years in America is complicated, but it's mostly Reagan's fault. And as a product of that, I think that you could probably make a decent argument for the federal minimum wage being something around $21 an hour, with allowances for it being higher in denser populations, New York City, Seattle, Los Angeles, blah, blah. Now, there are some difficulties with this. Well, first of all, we have data on the relationship between the minimum wage and unemployment. And again, like, you can look it up if you want. It's just not an issue.
Unemployment, Vaush. What do you think that would do to employment? What do you think that would do for the employment numbers
I just
at
answered
those
this
particular organizations?
I just answered this question.
All right, does it go up or down? What happens?
It would stay the same, which is what it's always done with regards to unemployment.
You don't think that those
wage.
Businesses would hire anybody that they're not hiring now?
Well, see, that's the thing. I wasn't finished with my initial statement. There would be some issues in like the flyover states. See, there are many parts of this country where the economic extraction has been so severe from companies like Walmart, by the way, that there's not really a logical way.
What's economic extraction?
There is an enormous amount of wealth in places like New York and California, and a lot less in many Midwestern states.
No, I know that. What's extraction? What's extraction? Use the word extraction. What's that mean?
We have national or transnational corporations like Walmart that make an enormous amount of money by monopolizing the distribution of goods in areas of the country where there aren't really many alternatives, but the money doesn't stay in the city where they buy their goods from Walmart from. It goes to the Walmart Corporation.
You're saying that they monopolize them. How do they do that?
Because the nature of markets under capitalism is towards monopoly and always has been outside market regulation. You can actually take a look. You can actually take a look.
Let's talk about Walmart.
No,
you're saying that Walmart.
Wait, stop. You keep trying to distract me, but I'm not done educating you in the minimum wage thing. You can actually take a look at the monopolization of basically every single like major industry in American history, and every time, like literally every time.
Is your example?
Literally every time, like you can take a look at railroads, you can take a look at agriculture, you can take a look at mining, you can like everything, and it's like, oh wow, tendency towards monopoly. Oh wow, tendency towards monopoly every time, even out in the Wild West where the federal government had no power, every time, because that's how markets work, baby. You need regulation to break them up, which is when we broke them up, by the way. Those were the times that we had demonopolization. It was when the government stepped in. Now, I don't think a $21 an hour minimum wage would be perfect fit in every part of the country. Look, I think some allowances would have to be made along other policies.
Walmart is not an example of a monopolistic provider making money by driving up prices the way monopolies do, right? I hope we can agree that that's not what's going on in Walmart markets. I'm curious about this extraction theory because I think it dovetails with your theory that we ought to have a government that is empowered to take money away
the Midwest
from rich people and giving it to poor
have you
people.
been the Midwest? Small American towns are dying because they used to have like a town square with vibrant local businesses that sold stuff a little bit higher at a cost, sure, but they also paid their workers more, and the money stayed in the town, meaning that there was more local investment.
Right? Do you know how monopolies make money?
No, please. If you spend money at a store and that store is a single store that's owned by a mom and pop and it's in your town, the money stays in your community, right? Except what goes to taxes. But when Walmart comes in and underprices everyone, which they can do, in the short term, it's beneficial because all this stuff is all cheap, right? But in the long term, the money gets siphoned out because the Walmart doesn't keep the money in the community. It goes to the corporation. And over the long term, you see like this incredible economic extraction from areas where there aren't enough people to like build out beyond that Walmart. Like, this is a studied economic phenomena. This is more poor people whose lives you don't care about because it's an argument against your economic theory.
Bausch, look, I've been respectful of you. You know, from time to time, you have been fairly respectful of me, not consistently. But I got to be honest with you, bud. Not going to put up with you telling me about for whom I care. I've worked my ass off through 2 careers in public service. Maybe you don't like my philosophy. Maybe you don't like me personally. Maybe you don't like the Libertarian Party. Maybe you don't like libertarianism. Maybe you don't like a whole lot of things. But, and we're going to close here, okay, bud? Here's the truth of the matter. I've worked my ass off to try to do right by people that I call brothers and sisters for no other reason than the fact that they're fellow Americans. I suspect that you feel the same way. We care about people. You do, I do. One of the ways that I've made a little bit of a contribution toward trying to help people's lives be better is by learning how the economy works, trying to make a contribution toward helping public policy be better in the United States at the federal government level and with multilateral agencies too. I probably didn't make the headway that I had dreamed that I would when I moved to Washington to try to make the world a better place. I always dreamed of being a police officer because I wanted to be able to help people, I wanted to be able to respond to calls, help people do the right thing. I was a registered libertarian while I was a police officer. I worked my ass off. Did I make all the progress that I wish I had in terms of making the police department a great place? Not all the progress I wish I'd had. Did I have a number of arguments with my boss and fellow officers about the way I wish things work and the way they actually do work? Sure. Am I proud of my work as a public servant? Yes, I am. Did I work in an area that had some bourgeoisie and some poor people? Yes, I did. And yes, I spent most of my effort in the areas where there weren't a lot of people with a lot of money. But I worked my ass off for them, Vouch. And for me to sit here and let you tell me that I don't care about my fellow Americans, I'm sorry. That's not just a silly statement, it's an insulting one. And it does not reflect well on your character. It frankly doesn't reflect well on your intellect. You should know me better than that. And that's fine. I've appreciated the time that you've given me, and I've appreciated the time that I've had with you. I think that, maybe some of your viewers, benefited from our exchange. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been in your show. Thank you very much for that. But I think we're done now.
Oh, do I get a closing statement, or was that was good? That was a good ending for you?
It was a good ending for me. The last thing you said was just blatantly false and insulting. If you want to say something else,
could I say something less insulting potentially?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Genuinely, I've enjoyed the conversation. Look, it's not a matter of malice. It's just, I really do think that your economic system is destructive, and there is a limit to the number of, like, oh yeah, here's my fantasy solutions I can hear, before thinking it's an almost like negligent disregard for the consequences of what you believe, right? But it's not a malice thing. I'm glad that you participate in our political process, and I think it's admirable that you've spent your life adhering to these principles. Even if I disagree with the principles, I like people who adhere. It's not my goal to insult, though I obviously do a lot. It's just like, I feel like what you're experiencing right now, the displeasure with my behavior, is just an infinitesimal fraction of the suffering that your policies would inflict upon millions of people, some of whom I care quite a bit about. And that I will always see that when you speak, There is no civil engagement outside of that context. This will always be a pale facsimile of what happens when we actually have the chance to do what we think of doing. And that's what gets me. I mean, I don't think there is civility in this context, really. There's only truth and ego and passion. And I enjoy those conversations.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. In that sense, I think that we oddly see eye to eye on that. I think socialism is a cancer, and the faster that we eradicate it, the better off our economy will be, and the better off the development of our culture will be, both at a community level, at a national level, and around the world. That's how I feel about it.
Well, we'll see which comes first, total deregulation or a workers' revolt. Though if your definition of socialism includes any and all kinds of regulations, then I don't think you're ever going to be happy. Everything gravitates back towards that, even attempts at creating some kind of deregulatory paradise.
Anyway, thanks a lot. I'm really grateful for your time.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too. I'll see you later.
Well, that was a wacky conversation. Oh my God. Yeah, so we didn't... Okay, to be clear, I know I said like bourgeoisie there a couple of times. Nothing that I said there was socialist, by the way. I was like, you like that was like basic liberal economics. You know what I mean? You know, it's not, you can't even talk about socialism. I was trying to get there with the indentured servitude thing because, you know, it's the fundamental logic of coercion and capital maintains its character from slavery all the way to what we have here. It's just different iterations of the same relationship. You know, obviously not all of them are equally bad. Slavery is a hell of a lot worse than this, but it's about the underlying analysis. And then, but I couldn't even get past that, right? He came really close to biting the bullet in coercion. Yeah, I couldn't get him to bite the bullet in anything because he would like patronize me, right? He would like, I would like be like, okay, you have to bite this bullet or move off it. And he would like pause for a second. He'd be like, well, I know I don't need to explain to you that what you just said is a bunch of bupkis. It's like, all right. I feel like I did okay. Yeah. So to be clear, right? Because like I couldn't even advance beyond like my liberal, like the baseline liberal economic positions here. The main issue is just that like libertarian economics is insane. It's completely insane. Like I think the clearest example of this was the case with undocumented workers, where in spite of the fact that we have a worker shortage, and in spite of the fact that undocumented laborers are paid less than citizens who work at those agricultural facilities, there's still a shortage. It's like, what? How does that make sense, right? Like, how can there be a shortage when we have literally less than minimum wage, no worker protections, labor? And it's like, well, the answer is because, like, it's not always that simple, right? It's not always that simple. The supply-demand graph doesn't explain everything. It explains some stuff, but not all of this. Why are you respectful towards the end? He was anything but respectful towards you. You need to tell us truth. Because I feel like I'd already made my point. You know, I don't actually take pleasure in being mean, I guess, like outside the context of making an argument. I'm okay with in the context of making an argument, it's fine. But like every time I would make a point, he would like run away from it. Like the teacher shortage thing, and he was like, "Well, shortage by your definition." It's like, bro, something like half of all public schools started the last school year with less than the number of teachers they should have had. Like it's insane, and the administrative blow, right? At the end of the day, like the fundamental rule of politics, not economics, but politics, is that the people in charge will make short-sighted decisions that they perceive to be beneficial for themselves. People aren't perfectly rational in the sense that they're not like, you know, omniscient gods, and they're also not economically rational in the sense that they always pursue their economic self-interest. For example, plenty of teachers get teaching jobs knowing that they're really difficult and low-paying because they want to be like an inspiration to young minds. I think that's great. I think that's a human spirit that needs to be cultivated. People who love something so much that they'll work for it, even if it's not like the best choice for them, that's passion. That's good. But yeah, no, it all falls apart. The Walmart thing as well. If you've ever wondered what happened to like middle America or whatever, you can experience this. Drive from one coast of the United States to another, okay? Just drive across it and stop in every town along the freeway. And the process that I described has happened in thousands of towns. This is also what happens to the black community, by the way. It's why they burned down Tulsa. Remember Tulsa, the Tulsa race riot, the Tulsa massacre when they bombed it? It's because in a community that doesn't have a lot of money, the best way to keep things up and up is to keep the money in the community. You don't want it to be siphoned out, right? Because, like, obviously, if you've got a small town in middle America with, like, 4,000 people in it, if you spend money on goods and services locally, but the money it keeps in that community, the consequence of that is that the money stays there. Some get siphoned off from taxes. It's not perfect, blah, blah, right? But, like, the money stays there. And what that means is that, you know, you paid for a burger at this place, but now the guy who owns the burger shop has that money, and that burger shop guy is now going to spend his money on the local tool store, and that it stays in there. That happens too in that's black nationalism. What I'm describing right now is black nationalism. Tulsa was the big black nationalist experiment. What happens if black people make an effort to build a local economic faction and keep the money in their community so it doesn't get siphoned off by like big, largely white-owned corporations during a time of segregation, right? What happens is you get firebombed. you get slaughtered. That's what happens. But like, or alternatively, Walmart comes in, underprices everything locally. Everyone's like, whoa, I can get everything for cheap now. But whoa, it turns out when you spend money at Walmart, Walmart doesn't then spend that money back in the community. It goes back into the Walmart family's corporate coffers. So yeah, you just kind of burn it out. And that's why a bunch of Walmart employees are on food stamps and welfare and shit. The government subsidizes their low pay. I grew up when the first Walmart opened in my home state of Maine. Walmart literally killed all the local groceries, electronic store suppliers, and even a lot of farmers markets. Now there's Target and Walmart, basically nothing else. Yeah, this is the reason why, like, right now you couldn't do a $20 an hour minimum wage in, like, middle America, but you could if it wasn't for that damage. Because wages used to be proportionally higher in those communities than they are now, even though they were paying more for their stuff because they didn't have like the economy of scale with Walmart. They kept it in, like it stayed in the community. It's difficult to explain because a lot of you guys, even I can't, it's difficult to understand, but it used to be, man, when you wanted to get a job, like in a lot of small towns, you would go to the local town square and there would be a guy who ran a restaurant there who your parents have known for 35 years. And he would go, you know, like, you're finally old enough to work, huh? Yeah, here you go. Throw you a rag and you get on it. That sounds like a stereotype. That sounds like a joke. Like, oh, right, okay, that's our imagined... No, that actually kind of did happen. That was a... There's a reason that we associate that era with that. And it's just because it hadn't been subjected to this, like, race to the bottom, like, you know, like hyper, you know, efficiency, drain the wealth bullshit that we've seen today. Okay, Vosh, but a lot of those places were sustained by anchor businesses like factories. Well, that's the Rust Belt. That's not so much small town thing. That's like the Rust Belt. That's a separate issue, yeah. That's manufacturing moving out, you know. But these things can be solved, right? Like, all the money is here. Not only is all the money here, more money is here than ever before. The total amount of economic activity that's running through this country is so high. Everyone could live like a king. Huey Long, every man a king, every woman a king, no queens. All right? That's gay. We could have that. But it's not just a matter of the wages you get. It's also where the money goes. That's the important part. When money stays in a local community, it circulates in a local community, and that keeps a local community healthy. It's just a localized form of colonialism. The entire history of economics has been a process of colonialism. Primitive accumulation at first, where you invade with armies and you enslave entire races of people and you have them mine up the diamonds, or they get the rubber trees or whatever, they get the cocoa, they get the tobacco. And then you have neocolonialism, where we just use our economic power to force other countries into being subservient to our business interests. But even locally, this happens. This is one of the reasons why you can buy a house for $5 and a blowjob in, like, a good portion of Kansas. But also, there's no work there. And then if you move to the city to find work, and there is work in the cities, mind you, the rent's also $4,000. It's completely fucked up. The money's in the wrong place, and this can be fixed. Not easily. It's a difficult process. It's not simple, and I'm not economically educated enough to have like a specific set of policies on how to fix this. But I've seen educated people talk about this tendency and how it could be fixed, and I know things can fix it. You know, it just takes a bit of elbow grease. It can be done, and it's worth fighting for. The death of middle America, man. It's not just middle America. It's like all over America, right? But middle America, it's I lived in a small town in West Virginia that was exactly this only 20 to 30 years ago. Small town square in cute downtown that used to be filled with local businesses that were all for rent by the time I lived there. Yep. Everyone talked about how this town used to be so much better, and it was exactly like you said. Everyone knew each other and shopped from each other and employed each other's kids when they got old enough to work. It was really sad. This is, unironically, this is what they took from you, okay? I am playing that the song that song, all right? This is a VHS tape. There's VHS static and magnetic interference that's playing. We're returning to tradition. Yeah, the Little Dark Age. Yeah, we're playing Little Dark Age right now. Return to tradition. And by return to tradition, I mean have a local town square where your parents know the people. Like, it's so sad. And a lot of people are leaving. Because why wouldn't they? Like, why would you stay in a town like that? It's like this. It's this. Photos like this, man. Look at this. When this town was built, it was going on the up and up. Wait, hold on. Is this Humboldt? No. Okay, sorry. Just there's a similarity. Look at this. Look at what I'm looking at right now. I want you to really think for a second, okay? What are some things you notice? This is a small town. What do you notice? You know what I notice? Brick. Brick pavement. Pathing. That's not cheap. Nice old-fashioned street lamp. Wide sidewalks. Look at this. This says apothecary right here. Brick and mortar stores. Nice ones. Probably used to be owned by families. But these areas are dead now. They're dead. They're completely dead. Yeah, stores that were beautiful and enjoyable and distinct. Stores that had character. Stores that meant something to the people who worked and lived there, not just interchangeable franchises. And now they're all dead and dying. It's all gone now, and it's not coming back. You can't just rebuild all of this. The economic processes, that's not how it works. You can't revive this. You can build something better, you can build something new, but this can't come back. Killed by cars. Cars is part of it, but a lot of these small towns were built during the heyday of the interstate highway project. So what I'm looking at right here, this is still car infrastructure, to be clear, but I want you to imagine, okay? I'm going to sound like a lunatic for a bit, but I need you to understand, okay? Look at this. I want you to imagine, all right? You're 18, you just graduated high school, all right? Now, your family's well off enough that you didn't have to work through high school, but it's probably time you got a job. Where do you get a job? Well, nowadays what you do is you would walk from door to door and get 1,000 little resume fill-out sheets to whatever the fuck, okay? But here, your parents know by first name a ton of the people who work at your local commercial district. You can go down there and you can just talk to people. You can talk to people who you know. I'm not saying this era was good, by the way. This was during segregation, and also they were not given, like, proper worker protections in a lot of cases. I'm not saying the era was good. I'm saying this element of the era, that personability was good. Sorry, online forms. That's right. It's online forms nowadays. Even back when I was in high school, you would go, even when I graduated 2011, which means that I went to work in 2009 or 2010 maybe. And back in those days, you could do it online, but in a lot of places, you could just go door to door asking for forms. Nowadays, I guess not. That was only a decade ago, a little more than a decade ago. I still remember how depressing that was, though. And you know, I'm speaking from experience here because the place where I failed to find work for 6 months was in Humboldt. When I graduated from university, I could not find work in Humboldt County. I didn't have a car, so and it's all really spread out, you know, so it took me so long to find a job that I tried streaming. And you know, you see how that worked out. The Arcata Plaza is still quite nice, and it's kept afloat by the students who come to the university. So this place still has a decent amount of economic activity, but it's artificial. The people who live in Arcata and Eureka, the sister city just a little bit to the south, are not doing good economically. This place has a little bit more money coming in just because of the tide of students, but it doesn't represent the actual longevity of the community. It's not people who are there. It's people who bring money in. You know, yeah. Yeah, it's extracting wealth, not much wealth, but some wealth from the places the students come from. They do some nice stuff there. The area also has the feel of a nice, like you can see, that's McKinley. He's one of the founders of the area. He probably killed like 5 billion native people, so don't like him. But, you know, people still come out down here to the you know, the place, the drive down quite often. There's a lot of really good places to eat here, too. Eureka's even worse. I guess they have a decent amount of traffic. Eureka is about 60,000 people, though, so it's not like a small town. They have some nice stuff there. You can always tell when you're in the Old Town District. Have you ever noticed that, by the way? Why do you think they call them Old Town Districts? You can find them in basically every city, every town. They call them Old Town Districts because they were the buildings that were built in the town center back when the town had the money and drive to have a unique personality. And now it's called the Old Town area because the only place you can actually get work is like the sparse office buildings that have been built in some other section of the town. And it's old because it's dying. Yeah, different zoning laws push people around, yeah. Also worth noting, by the way, not to permit or give any allowance to the kind of stuff that they've said. However, there is a deeply fascist character to many of the towns that I'm talking about that have died, because they are literally doing the, like, reject modernity return thing. I'm not saying it's all economic insecurity. I'm saying it's a lot of white people in, like, the you know, Midwest or areas that are economically deprived that live in small, regional, historically segregated communities that have grew up on stories about the wealth and prosperity of America and their local town, but live in this, like, dying, like, hollowed out husk. And as a result of that, they're very susceptible to propaganda about how it's being done by immigrants or neoliberalism or global. Well, hold on, neoliberalism is doing it, but you know, or globalism or the Jews or whatever else. Yeah, they're very susceptible to that. And they are racist. Yes, a lot of them are racist. A lot of these towns were literally built up in the 40s and 50s when the country was still segregated. And because redlining kept a lot of people out, or at the very least kind of like, you know, generally prohibited people from moving in there. Like, now in a world where people can kind of move where they want, there's no reason to move there because they're all dying. So it's eliminated third places for us too. Oh, yeah. You remember how much we've talked about third places before and their importance? The idea is that you should have like a hangout spot that is not your home and not your work. That's very, very, very important for a person, like, emotionally, I think. Even if it's just a local bar, you know? Like, that sounds so... What's that sitcom, that bar where everyone knows your name? That one? What's that? Like, that's a fantasy to a lot of people now, you know? Cheers? Gotcha, cheers. That's a fantasy to a lot of people. Not to mention, even with the fact that it's difficult to find those third places, the character of these third places has changed because people move around so much. You know, you can have a nice bar, but it's like, it's all what? Tourists? It's all college students? It's not the same, you know? It's different. Things are different. And I'm okay with big cities having lots of people and things change all the time, but you should have, like, core places to root yourself in, something you can rely on. This is doable. This is not a ridiculous ask. Yeah, COVID killed a lot of these places as well. Yeah, teens don't have anything nowadays, man. Back when I was a teenager, malls were still okay, you know? Like, I was a teenager back in, what, 2006, 2007, 2008? Like, malls were dying then, too, but nowhere near what they are right now. And nowadays, like, yeah... Yeah, nowadays teens have Facebook and depression. I don't even think teens use Facebook anymore. And malls still sucked, you know? It's just better than literally nothing. I hate malls, but I want malls to be replaced with, like, a vibrant town square or a place where you can go and have fun, right? Also, bring back arcades. Not just barcades, arcades. I know that COVID did a number on them. Barcades are for me. I'm an adult. I'm almost 30. Arcades, however, let the kids have their arcades. Not some Chuck E. Cheese bullshit. Like, make a real arcade, you know? We use TikTok? Yeah. They don't want them. If they did, people would open them. Yeah. Consoles and PCs killed those for good. No, I disagree. Barcades, like Dave & Buster's or whatever, they can do pretty well, but it's usually adults who are going for them because the adults have the money to go for something like that, you know? When I think of an arcade, though, by the way, I don't mean something like this. This is a bit, you know, it's a place to lose your quarters. I mean, like, just a place where there are fun physical games that you can play with people that you care about, you know? Like, what do they call it? What's it called? Not foosball or table. What's the thing where it's like it's floating on a bed of air and you knock the pucks around and you get your hand destroyed by them? Air hockey? It's air hockey? I love getting my fingers smashed by those. Yeah, that is a crazy fun game, dude. Why did we make one game where you use an air table and then stopped. Like, those are so fun. It's right in the middle of the image. Yeah, but I don't know what it is based on the look. Patents? Maybe. Skee ball sucks. Skee ball is not fun, by the way. So I'm not sorry. Skee ball is not fun. Okay, you do it because you want to. You try it for what? You go one game because you want to hit the corner thing for the tickets. It's not that fun. It's not fun. It's not fun. The perfect way to play skee ball is to master one throw and then do it over and over and over and over and over again. It's not fun. So you suck at skee. I suck at skee ball. I'm terrible at it. I'm so bad at skee ball. Yeah. You have to make it fun. Yeah, by chucking the balls at people. Here, this is a barcade in LA. Kind of like this a bit more, except it's all pinball. I guess I like arcades that aren't just all big flashy Chuck E. Cheese lights. I don't like that part, you know. Also, this is all like pinball and cabinets, you know. Where's the air hockey? Give me the air hockey. I guess it's difficult to strike a good balance here, you know. I'm trying to find a picture that has what I would consider to be the optimal relationship between, like, bar and cade, you know? Some of these are pretty cool looking. Try being a teen without a license in suburbia. Yeah, it's terrible. Most kids do D&D cafes these days. See, that's nice. I used to have a lot of fun going down to my local Games Workshop and other local, like, gaming stores. Though I would never play 40K or D&D there. There were always, like, you know, like the squad, like there were cliques there, and you know, but that can be fixed. That's improving with time. I wonder if the game store that I grew up on is still there in Santa Monica. I wonder if it is. It's probably not. Paper Heroes Games. What is that? Is that it? That's not it. Nah, they probably closed it. Nah, it sucks. It's been a long time. I have too much pride to sink that low. Listen, I just think there should be places where you can go to meet people you enjoy talking to. The nice thing about hobby stores is that because they are literally hobby stores, you can go there and be virtually guaranteed to find somebody who will be fun to talk to with respect to your shared interest, you know? And that's good, right? I mean, that's nice. Hobby stores are fun. They have a problem with elitism, and they have a problem with sexism, but not all of them, and it's getting a lot better. It's getting significantly better. Yeah, movie blocks. A lot of it is also accessibility. People are much less likely to go to a third place if they have to drive 15 minutes and park to get there. Because, like, that, you know? When I was in Los Angeles, I used to think that, like, a 30 or 40-minute drive was a long drive. LA traffic, you know, like, whatever. Now that I live in Seattle and I'm woke, when I have a drive that's more than 10 minutes, I think that's a long drive. Because driving. I am no longer falling for the bullshit propaganda that driving is fun. Driving is fun when you first learn to drive, or when you're doing a road trip with your friends in the back, or with you're in a convertible and you're on a mountain road and the air is whipping against your face. That's fun. Driving 2 hours of every day of your life just to do basic shit around a city, sitting in traffic, red light this, red light that, right turn here, left turn here, that sucks. It's not fun. It's not interesting. It's not liberating. It doesn't make you any more free. It's bullshit. I just don't take it. It's more than a 10-minute drive. You know, I don't even want to do a 10-minute drive. I don't want to drive. I mean, if it's like a 5-minute drive, you know, so it's a little more enjoyable. Do you take the bus? Nah, buses aren't that great in Seattle. I don't want to have to travel.